widespread agreement on these sanctions that we saw over the summer. Now the president sounds very hopeful that there will be some ability to pressure North Korea, and China, of course, is going to be a big part of however that gets done.
Right. So now the Secretary of State did meet with his Russian counterpart last night, and according to the State Department, one of the things they talked about, I guess, was moving forward in Syria. Not quite sure where they're going with that, but what does the White House expect to take away from this week? Anything in particular? More commitments to
turn left,
Korea, or anything solid, concrete?
I would look for some kind of statement to come out of the Latin American leaders meeting tonight, Tim, from the White House. We've been given some firm expectations that there might be some kind of deliverable coming out of that, maybe a statement of condemnation of what's happening with Maduro in that country, also maybe some kind of action against the Cuban government for the diplomats that have been attacked in the United States Embassy in Havana. That's something that's happening, I would say, in the next 24 hours or so. Of course, anticipating President Trump's speech tomorrow, his first to the United Nations General Assembly as president. Tomorrow morning, looking forward to that, where the White House will emphasize sovereignty, international security, American goals, but also the reform, as we heard from the president and from the UN, the Secretary General. Reform is the watchword right now for the United Nations. They seem to agree on that much at least. So looking for what they can announce. I think we're going to see some movement on Latin America, especially after the dinner tonight. Some more on reform, and we'll see what kind of President Trump shows up tomorrow, Tim, as we're expecting these remarks to take place. It's about 30 minutes, anticipating that this speech has been written.
In 1/4 of a mile, bear right onto I-278 East toward Brooklyn Queens Expressway.
To the prepared remarks, so I'm not sure if there are any other major deliverables. We've been given some low wattage expectations, but those are the ones that I would be watching for at this point.
All right. Thanks, Jared.
Thanks, Tim.
Jared Rizzi, our White House correspondent. Follow along at Jared Rizzi if you want to go on Twitter, and we'll be, of course, bringing you the president's speech tomorrow at the UN. Later, he will be meeting with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. That's at least on the schedule, so we'll follow along closely. But in a moment, we are going to take you to something different, a little conversation with an author. He is Jeremy Suri, a distinguished professor for global leadership, history, and public policy at the University of Texas at Austin. And he has written a book called The Impossible Presidency. What's it about? We will delve into that with the author as we continue the midday briefing on POTUS.
Here's what's happening on Sirius XM Sports. Which NFL teams are off to great starts?
He seems upset.
Off days. Sirius XM NFL Radio is breaking down all of Sunday's big stories and getting you set for the New York Giants and Detroit Lions on Monday Night Football. All on your 24/7 home for the NFL. Sirius XM Channel 88 and the Sirius XM app. Sirius XM Sports. Wherever you are, your team plays here.
What if hiring could be easier, less time-consuming, with more qualified candidates and faster results? What if hiring could be smarter? Thanks to ZipRecruiter, it can be. With one click,
bear right
to over 100 of the web's leading job boards, so you don't spend time wondering where the right candidates are searching. Then ZipRecruiter uses its smart matching technology to scan millions of active resumes and notify the most qualified candidates to apply for your job. And the ZipRecruiter dashboard makes it easy to review, rate, and contact candidates all in one place. No wonder 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site in just one day. ZipRecruiter makes it simple for growing businesses of all sizes to hire the right people in the industry. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire.
You're so confident ZipRecruiter will get you the results you need. We'll let you try it free. That's right, free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/POTUS. That's ZipRecruiter.com/POTUS. ZipRecruiter.com/POTUS.
Exit 28B to the right onto Brooklyn Bridge.
Julie Mason on vacation, but that's all right. Isaac Colbert from Politico is here. White House correspondent, White House correspondent, who will be hosting the program this afternoon. fall, which may make the stoutest of them tremble. Restrained use of power and disciplined focus on the national interest were the only antidotes to excess, despotism, and decline.
Exit right.
We will grow with our power, Jefferson wrote, and teach us that the less we use our power, the greater it will be. Jefferson's heirs did not heed his words. That is from the very beginning of the impossible presidency, the rise and fall of America's highest office. The author is with us. Jeremy Suri is a distinguished professor of global leadership, history, and public policy at the University of Texas at Austin. Tweeting at Jeremy Suri. I'll spell it later. Jeremy, welcome. Thanks for being on POTUS today.
Thank you for having me on, Tim.
I note that this book was written, and I know you started working on it long before President Trump was elected, and there are some thoughts on it, but this is really about the changing nature of the presidency of the United States, of which you write several different things, but one of which is that no recent American president has been prepared for the overwhelming power of the office and the responsibilities and challenges that define it. How did we come to this point?
Well, Tim, I think what's happened is that over time, the office of the presidency has taken on more and more responsibility at home and abroad. Think how different it is today than it was 100 years ago, just in terms of the global reach of the presidency. And as this power has increased, as the responsibilities increased, and as expectations have increased, we crossed a threshold sometime after World War II, where it just became undoable. And this is not a problem of big government versus small government. This is a problem of losing priority and losing focus. There's some things we should do more of, and there are other things we should do less of. And we have trouble making those distinctions. And almost every
Prepare to bear left.
study since World War II in the second half of the book sinks in office because of this.
And one of the points is that there are a couple of different phases of the presidency, different parts of the book. And part one, which is the rise of the presidency, that includes George Washington, Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
In 1/4 of a mile, bear left.
Okay, up to the present with LBJ, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. I want to go back to the beginning, though. George Washington, you say, clearly affirmed the anti-monarchical definition
Bear left.
executive. What did George Washington do to shape the presidency for many years?
Well, Washington,
In 700 feet, turn left onto Chambers Street.
Because there's never been anything like it before. It's interesting that even the term executive really comes from that period. Washington did two things. First, he used the office to unify people. Citizens of Virginia and Massachusetts did not call themselves Americans. Washington had to give them that common identity. That's why he stood above party. Second thing he did is he created the infrastructure for bringing people together. That's what Hamilton's economic plan was.
Turn left.
Washington called for the creation of a higher education system. He called for the creation of national roads. He was knitting the country together. That's what he saw himself doing as president.
In the chapter on the people's president, we see Andrew Jackson, and you write, Jackson wanted the president to protect democracy above monetary stability, freedom above wealth. President Trump has often compared himself to Andrew Jackson. Do you see any of President Trump in Andrew Jackson or vice versa?
Well, this is a question that often comes up, Tim. There's one similarity between Jackson and Trump, and that one similarity is that both
In 700 feet, turn right onto Church Street.
The existing powers. For Jackson, it was the elites of Virginia and Massachusetts who had dominated the presidency until this time. For Donald Trump, it seems it's anyone who's been in politics before. But there are two really important differences that need to be emphasized. Andrew Jackson really believed the presidency was about helping frontiersmen like himself. He grew up in the Carolinas with nothing as an immigrant, as a child of immigrants, and really pushed himself and pushed others around him to settle in the rest of it, eventually settling in Tennessee and killing Indians and various others in the process. Jackson really wanted to make the presidency serve people on the frontier, and he was very serious about that. He did not want New York bankers in his government, and he kicked them out of his government. And then the second thing about Andrew Jackson is he had extensive experience in government before he became president. He knew how government worked. He had been a senator. He had been a member of the House. He was formative in the creation of the state of Tennessee. So he came in as an outsider, but also someone with inside knowledge and experience.
Turn right.
It sounds very similar to what you said about Theodore Roosevelt a little bit later. I don't want to skip over Abraham Lincoln. I'll come back to it. But where you wrote that President Theodore Roosevelt had written, good laws can do much good. Indeed, they are often indispensable. There is urgent need that we should have honest and efficient legislation and honest and efficient action by those whose province it is to put the legislation into effect. Great leaders around the White House would make good laws. That
do that both in domestic and foreign policy.
There were expectations of action that Theodore Roosevelt put into the presidency, correct?
Yes, and I think at some point, and other historians have made this point as well, Theodore Roosevelt did begin to overextend the presidency. He was trying to do perhaps too much. He was hyperactive. If he were growing up today, we'd say he was someone with ADD.
Okay, Theodore Roosevelt, a global thinker, you say. Was he global in the sense that we hear today about globalism?
Well, yes and no. He was not as global as we are today. He didn't think about financial markets in the way we do today. Things didn't move as fast. You couldn't jet set around. He was still in the age of ship travel, of course. So he was not global in terms of...
In 1/4 of a mile, bear left.
Of course, there was no internet. I need to remind my students of that. They can't imagine there was a time when there was no internet. But Theodore Roosevelt was global in two senses, Tim. One, he saw the United States as a power with interests and with a role to play on all continents. And he very famously helped to negotiate a peace treaty between Russia and Japan, for which he won the Nobel Peace Prize, the first American to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Second thing that made Theodore Roosevelt global was he did have an understanding and a belief that American military force and American economic activity had to operate more broadly, so he contributes to the creation of really a modern Navy and encouraging industrial activity.
That was an accident.
Reach into markets overseas.
That one was crazy.
Possible
There's a
presidency.
video on that one later.
All of America's highest office, Jeremy Suri, the author, is with us. And you mentioned we were comparing a little bit of Donald Trump and Andrew Jackson. You actually say that there was a commonality with Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln when you write, insecure men of the frontier, Lincoln and Jackson were dogged, often ruthless campaigners for themselves and what they believed in. More than anything, this quality made them modern American presidents. You also write that Lincoln's tall shadow hangs over all of his successors. It symbolizes possibility and tragedy. It inspires as it haunts powerful leaders struggling to measure up. So was Lincoln's presidency a singular moment? Is that something that could ever be recreated?
That's a great question. I hope we could recreate it one day, but it will be very hard. Lincoln's a phenomenon. I mean, this is someone who had less than 2 years of education, but yet mastered the English language on a scale that few other Americans have ever mastered it. He's a man of incredible ability to learn. He has to basically train himself to be the general of the Union Army because he can't find someone to do it, and he finds Ulysses Grant. But like Jackson, Lincoln was a poor boy born on the frontier, and we know that now, but that's an incredibly radical thing in the 19th century to have the leader of a major power come from the frontier in that way with no education, no property, and rise up. You didn't have that in any peer society. And what he brought with him, Lincoln did, was a belief that government had to play a role in helping people like himself, and that's what we've lost today. We're so cynical. We're so...
In 1/4 of a mile, turn left, then turn right.
Even in this terrible time of civil war, raised Americans up high to believe in higher ideals, and that's what the Gettysburg Address and the Second Inaugural are all about. We'd be well served if we had leaders who helped raise us rather than tear us down.
To the man considered to be the last of our great American presidents, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, you write, he was a joiner, an organizer, and a community builder. Roosevelt brought people together, and he encouraged them to
turn left.
He motivated and encouraged. He rarely dictated, and he never claimed personal superiority. He was a healing president, not a forceful Führer. And you also quote Saul Bellow, who called him Leviathan civilized. So why is he the last of the great presidents?
Well, Franklin Roosevelt, first of all, was so confident and secure in who he was that he didn't have to tell people that he was the smartest.
Turn right onto Holland Tunnel.
He was able to draw people in and take the best ideas around him and use the presidency to put them into action. He really didn't see himself as the author of ideas or programs. He saw himself as the facilitator, as the person who would take various good ideas and put them into action to help heal a very troubled economy and then to help defeat the fascist powers overseas. He really healed American society. American society was in terrible shape in the 1930s. And Franklin Roosevelt not only created hope, he created the foundations for things we still rely on today. We're still living on the fuels of that era. If you think about Social Security, if you think about the way we structure public
Hello?
that we saw over the summer, now the president sounds very hopeful that there will be some ability to pressure North Korea, and China, of course, is going to be a big part of however that gets done.
Right. So now the Secretary of State did meet with his Russian counterpart last night, and according to the State Department, one of the things they talked about, I guess, was moving forward in Syria. Not quite sure where they're going with that, but what does the White House expect to take away from this week? Anything in particular? More commitments to
Turn left.
Korea, or anything solid, concrete?
I would look for some kind of statement to come out of the Latin American leaders meeting tonight, Tim, from the White House. We've been given some firm expectations that there might be some kind of deliverable coming out of that, maybe a statement of condemnation of what's happening with Maduro in that country, also maybe some kind of action against the Cuban government. Widespread agreement on these sanctions that we saw over the summer. Now the president sounds very hopeful that there will be some ability to pressure North Korea, and China, of course, is going to be a big part of however that gets done.
Right. So now the Secretary of State did meet with his Russian counterpart last night, and according to the State Department, one of the things they talked about, I guess, was moving forward in Syria. Not quite sure where they're going with that, but what does the White House expect to take away from this week? Anything in particular? More commitments to
Turn left.
Korea, or anything solid, concrete?
I would look for some kind of statement to come out of the Latin American leaders meeting tonight, Tim, from the White House. We've been given some firm expectations that there might be some kind of deliverable coming out of that, maybe a statement of condemnation of what's happening with Maduro in that country, also maybe some kind of action against the Cuban government for the diplomats that have been attacked in the United States Embassy in Havana. That's something that's happening, I would say, in the next 24 hours or so. Of course, anticipating President Trump's speech tomorrow, his first to the United Nations General Assembly as president. Tomorrow morning, looking forward to that, where the White House will emphasize sovereignty, international security, American goals, but also the reform, as we heard from the president and from the UN, the Secretary General. Reform is the watchword right now for the United Nations. They seem to agree on that much at least. So looking for what they can announce. I think we're going to see some movement on Latin America, especially after the dinner tonight. Some more on reform, and we'll see what kind of President Trump shows up tomorrow, Tim, as we're expecting these remarks to take place. It's about 30 minutes, anticipating that this speech has been written.
In 1/4 of a mile, bear right onto I-278 East toward Brooklyn-Queens Expressway.
To the prepared remarks, so not sure if there are any other major.
At this level, depersonalized what had been a profoundly personal office. Was this the beginning of that? Was that there wasn't the peak of that? Because quite frankly, today I can only imagine it's even harder for a president to get outside the bubble.
Yeah, I think this is another way, Tim, in which the period of Kennedy is so different from the period of Roosevelt. Even though, again, Kennedy tries to explicitly model his administration on Franklin Roosevelt, the White House was still small, and Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, even Dwight Eisenhower, when they would go on vacation, for example, they would go with just a few bodyguards and a few friends, and they would actually interact with people when they left the White House. It's with Kennedy that we get to begin to see what we see today, the huge entourage, the huge security commitment around the president. And Air Force One now providing jet air travel where the Oval Office moves with the president. So the president never really gets away. That's different from Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower. Truman and Eisenhower could go play golf or go to Key West, Florida, and they would be away. President Kennedy could never get away, and that makes it impossible to interact with citizens in any kind of ordinary way. Think about it this way. From Kennedy's time forward, presidents never stop at red lights. Think about how that would change your perception of the world.
I also think that, when Barack Obama took over as president, and we have not heard nearly as much from President Bush, it seemed
fucking asshole.
And there was a sense that people needed a reassurance that all things were going well, somewhat like after FDR acceded to office, because there were so many things that were happening, and people wanted to know what the president was doing. And I think one of the points you make, making the president ubiquitous created a bias. This wasn't specifically about Barack Obama, but making the president ubiquitous created a bias to quick action rather than deliberate consideration. I think it has shaped the nature of the presidency, not just the way we perceive the presidency.
I agree 100%. That's so well.
In 1/4 of a mile, bear right onto I-78 toward New Jersey Turnpike.
He's the most powerful person in the world, but you see in the calendars how the crisis of the moment dictates what he does much more than what he wants to do. We elect people to do one thing, and they end up governing in a totally different way because of the crises and the media environment that they're in.
They're right.
That we're discussing is The Impossible Presidency. Jeremy Suri is the author of the book. I wanted to touch on JFK and LBJ. You do mention in one part, you have this quote here, that Howard defined Kennedy and Johnson more than they defined it. They departed from their priorities because they felt they had to. What did that mean for their presidencies?
They both felt obligated to do things, particularly in foreign policy, that they knew were not in the interest of the country. And they felt obligated to do that because they felt as a powerful Cold War country, we had to get involved in things. We had to stop the spread of communism. Even if in stopping the spread of communism in certain places, we were harming our own interests, spending our own treasure, and losing sight of our own priorities. And that's the story of Vietnam more than anything else. Both Kennedy and Johnson, and the Ken Burns series is covering this beautifully, both Kennedy and Johnson were pessimists about Vietnam from the start. But they got involved because they felt they had no choice because of such a powerful country. It's sort of like the way we think about Afghanistan. I have not met anyone who's optimistic about Afghanistan, but people are also hesitant to say we should pull out because we're supposed to be a powerful country. We're supposed to fight terrorism, so we should probably be there.
I wonder if it struck me that you didn't devote a chapter to Richard Nixon, and I thought, wow, his mistakes with Watergate, his breaking of the law, brought on so many different changes in legislation, so many institutional changes to the presidency, some weakening by Congress. And although it was not necessarily
Prepare to bear left
so much as it was Richard Nixon, the criminal, that changed the presidency, I wonder how much the presidency changed as a result of his actions and what Congress did to sort of curb the power of the executive.
It's a great question, Tim. One of the reasons I didn't write about Nixon more is I'd written about him in other books, so I was kind of tired of writing about Richard Nixon, to be honest. But I also think that the changes that are brought on in the office by Nixon have actually begun with Kennedy and Johnson. It's true that Nixon was the one who broke the law, and Watergate is different from anything Kennedy and Johnson confronted, but you do see in the 1950s the beginnings of more of an effort by other branches of government to limit what is seen as the excessive powers of the president. This really begins with the Bay of Pigs fiasco in 1961. So you can chart a line from the Bay of Pigs through Watergate to see more and more criticism.
In a half a mile, bear left and continue following I-78 West.
And Nixon's paranoia plays into that, but I think it's part of the same story.
The chapter on Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, you call them magicians of possibility, and one of the things that you write is presidents always had detractors, but Bill Clinton and Barack Obama elicited notably extreme emotional responses magnified by a 24-hour news cycle, and in Obama's case, a social media landscape that encouraged sensational appeals to the prejudices of viewers. I can hardly imagine that any of the previous presidents in the first half of the book would have been able to succeed.
Bear left.
That today's media puts on the presidents of the United States.
I think that's right, but I think that's not really just about the media. That's about the central point I'm making about this office being so powerful. The office is so powerful that it attracts too much attention, and it attracts too much criticism, just as it attracts the awe of some. When you're this powerful, this is that old sort of Shakespearean story. When you're this powerful, you become a magnet for detractors, and this is one of the reasons why both abroad and at home we'd be better off being a little less powerful. That's the core insight I'm trying to get at here.
Jeremy, I want to go back to something. I used this quote earlier, but I put it in conjunction with a couple of other pieces. No recent American president, you write, has been prepared for the overwhelming power of the office and the responsibilities and challenges that define it. And I wonder about Bush 41, George H.W. Bush. He had been vice president for 8 years under a pretty successful president. Even Richard Nixon had been president under Dwight Eisenhower. Ronald Reagan, yeah, he wasn't president executive, but he had been governor for 8 years. He also was an actor, which kind of helped him, when he had to make the appeals that he needed to make. And I wonder what does, if anything nowadays, prepare anyone to be president of the United States?
Great question. So I think the men you mentioned, particularly George H.W. Bush and Dwight Eisenhower, and Ronald Reagan as well, were better prepared than most others for the reasons you laid out. But the moving from number 2, or from governor to number 1, the president, is a huge step. That's one of the points I'm trying to make. George H.W. Bush, for example, was probably the best prepared president we've had in 30 to 40 years for foreign policy, but was woefully unprepared and got into a lot of trouble, obviously, with domestic policy, and was also woefully unprepared for the media attention research, Tim, that the office is so difficult that outsiders cannot succeed. This doesn't mean you have to spend your whole life in politics. But if you come, even if you're a successful business person or a successful academic, and you come into the office, and this is really your first time operating and in a public leadership position, there is no way you can do this. There is no way. And that's not about Trump personally. That's about the false allure of outsiders. An outsider cannot do this job. It is too difficult for anyone, even someone like a George H.W. Bush, who has so much inside knowledge.
There is also one other somewhat disturbing conclusion, and you write, politicians, journalists, and intellectuals spend much of their time correcting false information, not debating the real challenges confronting the country. The contrast with the rigorous fact-based dialogue envisioned by the founders and later generations could not be greater. So is there a solution to that?
Well, I try to argue that this is a really difficult problem. It gets worse, as everyone knows. But I think there are two solutions. One is the president has to go back to actually being fact leaders and seeing their role as educational presidents. And this is not just Trump. Presidents spend too much time now making partisan statements. They've got to, when they're in office, rise above that. And we have to choose people who will rise above it, just as we expect our professors to rise above politics and provide objective knowledge in the classroom. We should expect our presidents to do the same thing. And second, we need to fund institutions that do that. We have so systematically underfunded education, so systematically underfunded the public media. I don't think information should be provided to citizens only because it provides revenue to those who are providing it. There should be information out there that the citizens are getting from entities that are funded by the government to provide the best objective analysis they can. I like the model of the British BBC, for example. I think we need to fund public information.
Prepare to bear left.
That's to nothing. It's the cost of a few aircraft.
Well, it's a fascinating look through the history of these presidents that we were talking about. You can check it out for yourself. The book, again, is The Impossible Presidency, The Rise and Fall of America's Highest Office. Jeremy, thanks for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Those are great questions, Tim.
Jeremy Suri is the author of The Impossible Presidency. You can check him out on Twitter at Jeremy Suri, at JermiSuri. This is the Midday Briefing on POTUS. Coming up, we will have more from the United Nations. Also, by the way, just to let you know, at 2 o'clock East this afternoon, a rebroadcast of the interview with Full Stop's Mark Preston, Nancy Pelosi, Democratic leader in the House. That's coming up at 2. It's all ahead on POTUS.
In a half a mile, bear left and continue following I-78 west toward Newark.
Joining me on SiriusXM Triumph is some new, life-changing, breaking news shows. We'll focus on small business, answer all your retirement questions. We've got solutions for questions on life and money, and a show on how to get the most
Bear left.
your work and career. Join me along with all these exciting new shows from the Ramsey Network, weekdays, 1 Eastern, only on SiriusXM Triumph, channel 132.
In the aftermath of the recent
Take the next exit to the right onto I-95 south toward Turnpike South.
Shelters are open, truckloads of supplies are being distributed, and volunteers are in place. If you'd like to help, please visit redcross.org or call 1-800-RED-CROSS.
Exit right.
Text either Harvey or Irma to 90999 to make a $10 donation. That's 1-800-RED-CROSS. Or text Harvey or Irma to 90999. Message and data rates may apply.
Live from the SiriusXM POTUS studios in Washington, D.C., this is the Midday Briefing.
Elon Berman joins us on POTUS today. Elon is Vice President of the...
In a half a mile, bear left onto Cars Only.
Interestingly, just back from the Middle East, and the President has a meeting today with Prime Minister Netanyahu, so let's talk about that a little bit. First of all, welcome back to the show, Elon. Good to have you on board.
Oh, always good to be here.
All right, so on the sidelines, if you will, of the United Nations General Assembly, what's the expectation? What did you find out in your trip that may be somewhat informative of what the President and the Prime Minister might be talking about today?
Bear left.
Right. So a couple things. So while I was in Israel, the Israeli Prime Minister actually wasn't there. He was traveling by a very circuitous route to New York, to the General Assembly, and he made his way there by way of Latin America. He had a sort of a three-country tour. He stopped in Argentina, he stopped in Colombia, he stopped in Mexico, and it was a pretty interesting sort of diplomatic exercise because it was an attempt certainly not a lot of huge strategic takeaways, but it was clearly an effort by the Israeli government to hedge their bets, to think a little bit outside the box, to reestablish. These are all countries that are friendly to Israel, generally speaking, but this was clearly an effort to sort of build tighter bonds, to create a Latin American insurance policy, if you will, before going into this, what could potentially be a volatile conversation with the U.S. president.
So, give us a sense of also one of the things that I would be interested in is your take on the Iran nuclear deal. It is expected this week that the president will allow this deal to continue, although there's been some talk about eventually him getting rid of it. It was very much part of the campaign in 2016. It was a deal that was very much opposed by the Israeli prime minister. I wonder, is that a part of the conversation at all? I know it's something else you've been looking at closely.
Absolutely. No, I think one of the sort of handful of huge big ticket items that is going to be on the agenda when President Trump meets with Prime Minister Netanyahu is precisely that, is what to do with Iran beyond the confines of the nuclear deal. Because that's really sort of the rub. The Israeli government has been very vocal about the need to either fix or abrogate completely the Iranian nuclear deal for a whole host of reasons. But for the new administration, as they begin to work their way through a comprehensive policy review on Iran, they're running into this problem, which is that the last administration really defined down all of America's concerns with Iran to the nuclear issue and then signed an agreement which was intended to be tactical but conveyed all sorts of strategic benefits, right?
Wow, that plane looks like it landed right on the highway.
Emboldening of Iranian policy. So now the White House has to do two things simultaneously. It has to figure out what to do with the Iranian nuclear deal, whether it's possible to fix it or whether it needs to sort of scrap it entirely and move on to something else, and then to deal with everything else that has been neglected over the last 8 years. Iran's support for terrorism, Iranian deliberation activities, Iran's sort of insurgent activities in various theaters, including Syria. Right, it's a big agenda.
You mentioned Syria. Interesting. Again, Elon Berman was Senior Vice President of the American Foreign Policy Council. According to the State Department, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met last evening in New York on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly, recommended, according to Heather Nauert of the State Department, the two recommitted to deconflicting military operations in Syria, reducing the violence, and creating the conditions for the Geneva process to move forward pursuant to United Nations Security Council Resolution 2254. And that Security Council resolution was passed in 2015, and I think a lot of people expected that by now we'd be farther along.
Prepare to bear left.
Status of the U.S. and Russia, specifically with reference to Syria.
Right, and let's be clear, this was precisely a Russian play. This is sort of a Russian-driven conversation with regard to what happens in Syria. The Russians are now looking at a pretty significantly altered lay of the land on the ground. Iran and Russia, working in tandem with the Syrian regime, has managed to turn the tide as they see it against the Islamic State. We would say that the anti-ISIS coalition that we marshaled has played a role, but from the Russian perspective, they are the deciders, they're the ones driving the event. And they also know, I think, very clearly that the United States...
In a half a mile, bear left and continue following I-95 south.
...amenable to all sorts of conversations about a political settlement in the near future in Syria that's very likely going to check all the boxes for the Russians that they need. They need
bear left.
Facing presence in Syria. They need freedom of military action throughout the country so they can eliminate Islamic radicals that they fear are going to migrate back into the Russian Federation, and they need to be able to have a long-term military presence that enables them to project power into the Eastern Med. I think the way the conversation is evolving and the way it's going to evolve over the next week, I think the Russians are more likely than not to get most of what they want.
Elon, you mentioned the Islamic State, and according to a spokesman for the UN Secretary General, Stefan Dujarric, said that Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, believes any unilateral decision to hold a referendum would detract from the need to defeat the Islamic State. He is speaking specifically of the September 25th scheduled independence referendum, which would give the Kurds at least their incentive to have an independent portion of Iraq. And you wonder if the Secretary General's opposition to that referendum will somewhat delegitimize that referendum. What is your sense of things?
Well, I think probably not, at least not in the eyes of the Kurds. So this referendum is not the first rodeo. This is the first referendum on self-determination that the Kurds have engaged in. They did this about 12 years ago, and the results were nearly unanimous, right? There was 99% in favor of self-determination. It wasn't a binding referendum, but this vote that's coming up, or at least it's scheduled to come up on September 25th, is potentially much more decisive. If you're the Kurds, you're looking at an Iraq that is
no Chick-fil-A.
as fragmented as it has been at any time over the last decade. You're looking at an Iraq that is increasingly infiltrated with Iranian influence and power driven by Iranian-sponsored militias. And you're looking at a situation where there's enormous goodwill from the United States, from countries like Israel, about the role of Kurdish fighters, Kurdish Peshmergas, in the fight against the Islamic State. You look at all of this, and you figure out that maybe this is your moment.
Elon, finally, obviously North Korea is still an issue. There has been much discussion of that. One wonders what exactly we should be expecting from President Trump tomorrow, and the risk of putting him in a place where most people don't like to go, that is trying to figure out what the president's going to do next. I just wonder, what kind of a message do you think would be effective? What kind of an approach for this first visit and first address to the United Nations General Assembly might we expect from the president?
Right. Well, I think there's two messages that need to be sent this week at the United Nations by the president, by his surrogates, with regard to North Korea. One is that the United States is taking this crisis very seriously and is moving unilaterally to address it. You can see that in terms of the way their missile defense provisions have been structured in the new National Defense Authorization Act, the way the U.S. government is beginning to think about deterrence and containment and defense on the Korean Peninsula. But there's a second conversation, and this is where it's a little bit of a heavier lift, which is that the United States really shouldn't want to go this route alone. They should try to build a coalition, should try to build a consensus to try to contain and deter North Korea cumulatively. And that's going to be the heavy diplomatic lift for the president and for his surrogates, to try to cobble together a coalition after years of policy drift dealing with North Korea.
Well, we will see how that turns out. The president's speech is tomorrow. Elon, thank you as always for joining us.
Oh, great to be here.
Elon Berman, Senior Vice President of the American Foreign Policy Council, putting in perspective the things we can expect this week at the UN and what we might hear from the president as he has a series of meetings on the sidelines, including one today with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. We may hear from the president. A couple of pool spreads are scheduled if you want to follow.
Don't do what I did and run out. If it's working, don't quit. Why would you stop? Why undo all the good that's been accomplished?
You've got to feed them right for life.
Dynamite is nutrition.
If I ever took Roy off dynamite.
No.
When I get to about 3/4.
When I get down to the bottom of my box of Dynamite, oh no, I've got a couple more scoops. It's time to place my order. Dynamite.com. DINOBITE.com.
859-428-1000.
Order a 90-day supply of Dynamite for your dog this week.
We'll send you a big tube of Doggo Suds free.
Peppermint, tea tree, lavender, Doggo Suds shampoo.
Made with all-natural coconut, jojoba, aloe.
And no itchy, harsh chemicals.
Lather up, rinse away.
Try Doggo Suds.
Free this week at Dynamite.com.
Just feed your dog right. Use Dynamite.
Dynamite for life.
859-428-1000.
859-428-1000.
DINOBITE.com.
Here's what's on demand right now on the SiriusXM app.
I'm Patrick Carese. Here, Julie Mason with Politico's Tim Alberta breaking down his piece, Is the Electoral College Due?
These twin organizations, these nonprofit groups that have taken to putting on these seminars, as they call them, and they do them in these incredible places. And what they're trying to do is sell state lawmakers and opinion leaders on this idea of changing the Electoral College, not through constitutional amendment, but through an interstate compact. The shortest possible explanation is that a number of states would have to change their individual laws so that they would give their electoral votes not to the candidate who wins their state, but who wins the national popular vote. And once enough states enter that compact, then it would go into effect. It would be triggered.
Hear the entire interview when you search #POTUS interviews on the SiriusXM app.
What an awful idea.
Trump in the UN, Hurricane Maria stronger.
States would give up their sovereignty.
President Trump is in New York urging the United Nations to embrace reform.
We encourage all member states to look at ways to take bold stands at the United Nations with an eye toward changing business as usual.
Prepare to bear left.
Being beholden to ways of the past. which were not working.
The president delivers his first address to the UN General Assembly tomorrow, and correspondent Jim Sciutto says many will be listening closely.
I speak to European diplomats frequently, and of course there are things they'll say in public and things they'll say in private. But in private, there's genuine concern, not just about the positions, but also about the style of leadership.
Hurricane Maria has strengthened to a Category 3 storm and is expected to hit the Leeward Islands and others in the northeastern Caribbean. And meteorologist Chad Meyer says Maria is likely to strengthen even more.
In a half a mile, bear left and continue following I-95 south.
Over Dominica today. This is the area that's going to get hit the hardest, and then right over Puerto Rico. Category 3, likely even Category 4.
Another example of bipartisanship in Washington, a Senate bill to establish a commission to look at ads on social media designed to influence America's elections. Our Steve Kastenbaum reports.
New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand said it's not enough for Facebook to hand over account information related to Russian troll farms that purchased ads on Facebook intended to influence the presidential election.
Because they are responsible for people who buy their sites, who use their platform.
She and Senator Lindsey Graham are co-sponsoring a bipartisan bill to create a commission that would look into America's cyber vulnerabilities as they relate to the U.S. election process.
It is illegal for foreign countries to undermine or participate in our elections.
She said Facebook and other social media companies need to be more transparent. Steve Kastenbaum, New York.
I'm Jim Ascendio.
This is the Midday Briefing.
Welcome to hour number 2 of the Midday Briefing. Couple of stories. Number 1, U.S. is withdrawing its proposal to let Turkish presidential guards buy American guns after the attacks on protesters in D.C. That is a breaking story. Also, a quick note that coming up at 2 o'clock today, a rebroadcast of the one-on-one interview, Mark Preston on Full Stop with the Democratic leader from the House, Nancy Pelosi. That's coming up today. In this hour, you're going to hear a conversation with Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. What shape might the Republican tax reform take? Also, John Feary, partner of EFB Advocacy, on Republicans and Democrats working together. He worked for Dennis Hastert. He knows the inside game as well as just about anyone I know. We'll hear that. We'll also hear from Tom Bevan, co-founder and executive editor of Real Clear Politics, if we have time. We do have the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer delivering remarks on U.S. trade policy today at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. And also, President Trump scheduled very shortly to be meeting with and perhaps meeting reporters with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Lots to come on this edition and this hour of the Midday Briefing on POTUS.
This is the Midday Briefing, live from the SiriusXM POTUS studios in Washington, D.C. Here's your host, Tim Farley.
The Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, thinks they can get something done by the end of the year. Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, also believes that. The question is, what will the shape of it be? Let's bring in Grover Norquist. Grover is president of Americans for Tax Reform, and he is tweeting at Grover Norquist and joins us this morning. Grover Norquist, welcome back. Thanks for being here today.
Absolutely. Glad to be with you.
What is, what's your sense of, first of all, do you think this can be done by the end of this year?
Absolutely. It not only can be, but it has to be. One of the reasons it will happen before December is that this has to take effect with a very strong pro-growth.
12 minutes into the event, Judge Moskov called the help desk to advise that the streaming camera in the ceremonial courtroom was incorrectly pointed to the jury's seating instead of the judge's bench. Nichols said that Abe was able to fix the view within 5 minutes.
The elected officials also agree with me. It needs to be sped up. They're looking at a date that matters. People in November, a year from now, don't see strong economic growth. They're not going to re-elect the guys who are in office.
Here's one of the big questions is who's going to get it done, because with the president reaching out to Democrats.
Hey, Uncle Doug, we just picked it up. Thank you so much. They are beautiful. I can't wait to use them.
Sensitive.
One, the only division among Republicans is which taxes to cut, how much, and in which order to do it. The list of taxes that all the Republicans agree need to be cut. The business tax, we're at 35%, Europe's at 22%, we're not competitive, that has to come down. The small business tax, small businessmen pay the personal income tax many times
the corporate tax, which is high as 43%. That needs to come down. There are 30 million small businesses that are more poorly treated than General Motors in terms of tax rate. That needs to come down. Get rid of the death tax, get rid of the alternative minimum tax, take the 7 individual rates down to 3, double the standard deduction from $6,000 per person to 12, from $12,000 for a married couple to 24, and to allow $2.5 to $3.5 trillion of American earnings overseas to come back to the United States without a penalty. Right now it sits overseas because we penalize you if you bring earnings, American company earnings, made in France, and bring it back and tax you again. This is nuts. So everybody agrees we're going to do those things, but how much, in what order, and some things will be permanently changed, and some will be temporary, and then you hope to re-up them later. That's the discussion we're having with the Republicans. Now, Democrats want higher taxes instead of lower taxes, and 45 of the 48 Democrats in the Senate sent a letter, rather insulting letter to the Republicans a month or so ago, saying, look at the tax report, it can't be a tax cut, and it can't be for everybody, and you have to do it with 60 votes, not 50. So they set up 3 things that would happen, and said, other than that, we'd love to work with you. Remember, Hillary ran promising $1 trillion tax increase, and she was the model.
You mentioned a lot about tax cuts, and I wonder, when you talked about the deductions being increased for individuals and married couples, etc., is there any other deductions? Should they be taken out to simplify? Because tax reform, people think, is really long overdue, not just in terms of the rate that people pay, but the deductions that are involved. What about that? Should they be overhauled?
There are a number of deductions and credits that have been put into the tax code over the years for political reasons, not economic reasons. And as many of those as we can pull out, I think we should pull out. I don't want to stop and derail the train if we find some very powerful political movement. The tax credits for solar power has a lot of political juice behind it. It destroys the economy, it doesn't actually help anything, but it's popular because a lot of business guys get money from it.
Well, how does it destroy the economy?
We want to stop it. Because it directs, it raises the cost of some things, it drops the cost of others, and it says we're going to discriminate between all the kinds of energy, and some, which is like the ethanol subsidy that goes, it's a tax subsidy, the tax subsidy which put ethanol into gasoline. Turns out bad for the environment, even Al Gore said that. But we were told that all the brilliant scientists thought it'd be good for the economy, and so we're doing something that is bad for the economy, raises the price of food in Mexico and around the world, and costs a bunch of money. It's a good idea to get rid of that. Maybe you can't, maybe it's too powerful, and farmers make money off it. But as many of those as we can reduce or eliminate, that would be helpful. We want to say to everybody, we're not going to discriminate between one industry and another, or one business and another. You, the American people, decide what you want to buy. We're going to have the same tax rate, the same tax policy for everybody.
Also, Grover Norquist with us, you mentioned about reclaiming money or getting money back that's sitting overseas that would be penalized if it came back. There's been talk of a border adjustment tax. How do you make sure that the money comes back here and maintain? Is that something that Republicans, it seems to me that they're split on the border adjustment tax too.
Well, the border adjustment tax is something that the House Republicans really like. And it allows you to have a territorial tax system like the rest of the world. We have a unique system. We tax, you work anywhere in the world, you get taxed by the American government, whereas other countries, if you're French and you come to the United States and you have a job, the Americans tax you. When you go back to France, all the money in your pocket belongs to you. They don't tax you again. We tax people and businesses again if they work or invest overseas. And so all that lovely money, which should be coming back to the United States, often doesn't. And Americans are the last people to be hired for a job in Saudi Arabia or France or someplace that's developed, that's doing something, because we're more expensive than any
Pentagon first, only because there are some important tax provisions that are part of the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, I'm a strong advocate of getting rid of tax increases. There are 20 tax increases in Obamacare, 8 of them directly to the middle class, and Obama said he would do that, and did. I think it's very important to get rid of all those taxes. There was a hiccup. We were one vote short in the Senate. They're coming back with a smaller version of that, which basically grants Obamacare and says, you know what, all of the money in Obamacare is going straight to the states without strings, and rather than have the clunky rules of Obamacare, we're just going to let 50 states do it their own way. So it's a big step forward, but it doesn't reduce the taxes. It simply takes the control out of Washington, and you have a competitive situation out in the country. We may get
those same clumsy bureaucracies that did a lousy job handling the stimulus, as you described it.
No. This is. Well, I would prefer step one: give the straight to the American people, leave it in their hands, as I'm talking about with repatriation. The second choice is if you're going to spend a bunch of money on a project, have 50 states compete to see which one does it best. This is Bill Clinton's good idea when he did welfare reform. Instead of having one-size-fits-all rules in Washington, D.C., you have 50 states doing it. Hawaii screwed up and things got worse. The other 49 states, things got better. People more confidently ran the welfare programs. But it's Hawaii's job to not screw up. But the 49 states all found new and better ways to help people who need help. So that there's better competition, not closer to people, just 50 of them, so there's some competition there. I do think, yeah.
I was going to say, we'll see it. We're out of time. We'll see how the debate unfolds. Grover, thank you as always for being on the show.
You got it. Take care.
Grover Norquist is the president of Americans for Tax Reform. How he would like to see it unfold, as Republicans and Democrats alike are looking for tax reform by the end of this year. He is tweeting at Grover Norquist. The House is out this week. The Senate later today will be taking up a defense spending bill. They are expecting to improve, or rather approve, the spending tonight by a wide margin. It'll authorize $700 billion of Pentagon budget for the fiscal year starting October the 1st, expanding U.S. missile defenses in response to threats from North Korea, refusing to grant the administration permission to close excess military bases. So we expect that to happen a little bit later. Moments ago, President Trump emerged from what is a gathering with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, in front of reporters for a couple of minutes. Let's listen to the two unfiltered here on POTUS.
Thank you very much. It's great to have Prime Minister Netanyahu with us today, a friend of mine for many years. And it's a real honor, I have to say. We're going to be discussing many things, among them peace between the Palestinians and Israel would be a fantastic achievement. And we are giving it an absolute go. I think there's a good chance that it could happen. Most people would say there's no chance whatsoever. I actually think with the capability of Bibi and frankly the other side, I really think we have a chance. I think Israel would like to see it, and I think the Palestinians would like to see it. And I can tell you that the Trump administration would like to see it. So we're working very hard on it. We'll see what happens. Historically, people say it can't happen. I say it can happen. But I just want to say, Mr. President, it's an honor to have you. Thank you.
Great to see you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. President, it's great to see you again. I want to say that under your leadership, the alliance between America and Israel has never been stronger, never been deeper. I can say this in ways that people see and in ways that they don't see. So I want to thank you for that. Equally, I look forward to discussing with you how we can address together what you rightly call is the terrible nuclear deal with Iran, and how to roll back Iran's growing aggression in the region, especially in Syria. As you said, we will discuss the way we can seize the opportunity for peace between Israel and the Palestinians, and between Israel and the Arab world. I think these things go together, and we look forward to talking about how we can advance both.
Still no Chick-fil-A.
We're going to be speaking tomorrow at the UN. And I want to say that under President Trump, America's position towards Israel at the UN has been unequivocal. It's been strong. It's got both clarity and conviction. friends around the world. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
And also, as you well know, this is the Jewish New Year this week. So I want to wish you, the Jewish community of America, Jews everywhere, people everywhere, Shana Tova, happy, healthy New Year. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
A lot of compression on the audio there.
You'll see very soon. You'll be seeing very soon. We're talking about a concept. We're talking about plans. You'll see. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, so the shout-out questions about North Korea and the Iran nuclear deal we'll see very soon, and President, he's not afraid to answer those. You know, some presidents are more strategic, some are just, non-responsive. President Obama rarely, if ever, answered any of those shouted questions, but President Trump does it a lot, so there's no reason why he wouldn't want to shout it out there. You might want to get an answer to it. By the way, the President and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel at a meeting today at the United Nations. Earlier today, the President noting that there needs to be some reform at the United Nations, but the U.S. is still supportive of the organization.
On behalf of the co-host countries, I would like to also thank Secretary General Guterres and you have been fantastic, for joining us, and we affirm our commitment to the United Nations reform, and reform is what we're talking about.
The President speaking earlier, he was joined by Antonio Guterres, who is the Secretary General, as well as the United States Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley. The President, by the way, has named the new Executive Director for the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. Jonathan Holyfield says he looks forward to increasing the university's contribution to the American economy and workforce. He spoke at the old Executive Office building today. His appointment answering one complaint of the leaders of those institutions who say the administration has been making slow progress on its promise to move the initiative from the Education Department to the White House. The President obviously was not there to meet the HBCU leaders or the student leaders as this was taking place today. As I mentioned, the Congress getting ready a little bit later on will pass a defense spending bill. The family of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn has established a legal defense fund for him as he is being examined, scrutinized, investigated by those looking into Russia's meddling in the 2016 election. His brother Joe Flynn and sister Barbara Redgate have announced the Michael T. Flynn Legal Defense Fund, citing the, quote, enormous expense of attorney's fees and other related expenses. And following what's been taking place in St. Louis, the latest there, students in the area protesting the acquittal of a former white police officer in the fatal shooting of a black man. In the suburb of Kirkwood, about 100 high school students walked out of their first hour classes. A district spokesperson, Ginger Case, said that they marched to the school's football stadium where a couple of students spoke, also saying that students who organized the protest notified the school about their plans, although the students' absences were not excused. Also, a little earlier, we heard from the acting police commissioner, Lawrence O'Toole, noting there had been about a dozen arrests, or so dozens actually, of arrests after violence erupted during the third day of protests.
We made more than 80 arrests. We confiscated at least 5 weapons. None of them were used. Some criminals assaulted law enforcement officers and threw chemicals and rocks at them. All the officers' injuries were minor or moderate.
St. Louis Mayor Linda Cruzan, after the police had made more than 80 arrests, noting that this was the response they made.
We have work to do here in the city. We need more and better opportunities for all of our citizens. But destruction cannot be tolerated.
And the police chief saying again, his job is to keep people safe.
I'm proud to tell you the city of St. Louis is safe, and the police own the night. But our officers are doing outstanding work. Once again, a group of criminals set out to break windows and destroy property.
That is again from St. Louis, where also we hear St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter, evidently among those arrested by police late yesterday. The newspaper reporting on its website that Mike Falk was covering the protest and its aftermath when he was taken into custody. The report did not say whether or not he was charged or released. City police say they'll release a statement. Yesterday marking the third day of protest again following the acquittal of that former police officer in an event shooting that took place in 2011. Stick around. On the way on the Midday Brief. everything we have. Remarks from the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. He's delivering remarks on U.S. trade policy priorities at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. Those remarks unfiltered on the way on the Midday Briefing on POTUS.
Songs from the 90s CD era and the 2000s iPod era that became pop hits. Sirius XM's new channel, Pop Rocks. Rock that pops. Pop Rocks.
Wilson doesn't seem to take any warning seriously. This Japanese citizen says, I'm hoping the U.S. will not react too strongly and cause troubles. It would be Japan and South Korea that would be hit by damages, so I'm worried about that. And then here, this was Japan's chief cabinet secretary at a news conference on Friday after the latest North Korean missile flyover. Yoshihide Suga, with his view. We cannot accept this excessive provocation repeated by North Korea, resolutely denouncing in the strongest possible words and also convey our people's strong resentment. Tough position for Japan. With us now from Tokyo, Yuki Tatsumi, Senior Associate of the East Asia Program at the Stimson Center in Washington. Yuki Tatsumi in Tokyo, thanks very much for being with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And with me in the studio is Thomas Berger, Professor of International Relations at Boston University, fellow at BU's Pardee School of Global Studies. He's been looking at military issues in Japan for 3 decades. Thomas Berger, welcome to On Point. Great to have you here.
Thank you for having me on.
Yuki Tatsumi, how would you describe the Japanese debate, conversation, dilemma as North Korea ramps up its nuclear program?
I think simply put, Japan is really in a dilemma. It really doesn't have a very good leverage vis-a-vis North Korea. Its bilateral relations with North Korea is really down to a minimal. They barely have no trade. There is really no economic transaction whatsoever, and moreover, North Korea just would not negotiate with Japan when it comes to nuclear or conventional arms or any kind of missile posture with Japan. They always want to deal with U.S. and it's always Pyongyang's preference to deal with the United States on this issue bilaterally. So Japan really has to rely on the United States to engage North Korea, and also it also has to some extent rely on the United States to deter North Korea. Now I think the conversation is finally shifting into what else we should be doing, we as the Japanese should be doing to invest in our own defense. But I think the bottom line is, as long as Pyongyang always looks at Washington first and foremost as a negotiating partner, Japan has to rely on the Washington, and just it can hope that it would also represent Japanese interest in that process.
Thomas Berger, 70 years of peace is a long time. It came after a period of heavy militarization in Japan and a long history of culturally of kind of a military mindset. Can you see a change in the basic chemistry, post-World War II chemistry, or thinking about defense and military unfolding, maybe not overnight, but over time, as the U.S. appears to be in some ways in a retreat mode, as China rises, and now North Korea has nuclear weapons very close to Japan?
Well, it's not like Japan has been exactly unchanging for 7 decades. Japanese attitudes have been shifting slowly for a long, long time. I mean, going back in the early post-war period, I mean, there was very strong sort of pacifist movement, never fight war again. But since at least the 1970s, Japan has been sort of step by step increasing its military capability, strengthening its alliance with the United States, and that's probably going to be accelerating as a result of these developments. I mean, Japan is not, as I think Makoto pointed out already to you, it's not that Japan is purely pacifist. They've got a large military establishment, $50 billion defense budget, advanced military capabilities, but they've been very, very cautious about how they use that military establishment. And I think that's shifting, new roles and missions.
Do you hear, Yuki Tatsumi in Tokyo, confidence in Japan that this North Korean situation can be diffused with diplomacy and sanctions? The Prime Minister's essay today in the New York Times seems pretty skeptical about it.
I think Japanese are indeed skeptical, and they have a good reason to be skeptical. In the last several years, talk over denuclearization of North Korea has, for lack of better words, pretty much failed. Chick-fil-A. Really no sign of making any meaningful progress, and in the meantime, we are now seeing in real terms, and Japanese are now seeing in real terms, North Korea's accelerated pace in their provocative behavior, including they're just about firing off something every other week, if not in a less interval. That said, though, military action is really the least preferred option for Japan as well. I think the Japanese gentleman who was on a BBC interview really put it out right that South Korea and Japan will be the immediate recipient of whatever the damage that will fall out that might come out of the any military action on the Korean Peninsula. So Japan really does not want another war breaking out on the Korean Peninsula, but at the same time, they are very skeptical of of the prospect of diplomatic negotiations. But at the same time, with the lack of effective leverage on its own, they are really in a tight bind here.
I'm going to call from Lloyd in Dover, Delaware. Lloyd, thank you for calling. You're on the air.
Yes, hello. The Japanese and the South Koreans, I think, being a logical target of North Korea's use of these missiles. They're continuing to try to expand their capacity, but even before they reach the United States, they've already proven they can reach Japan. And a threat to Japan would be a threat to America, which would really create problems. The Japanese had this peace constitution imposed on them at the end of the war, and as the experts have pointed out there, they've gradually been moving towards more and more self-defense, but it would seem to me that they're being forced into a position where, knowing that America hires a new chief executive every 4 to 8 years, they're going to have to develop their own extreme capability to respond in order to try to stop North Korea from using it against them. I think they're moving towards nuclear weapons. They certainly have the capability for it, even though it's now still a big argument in Japan.
Lloyd, I appreciate your call. Thomas Berger, there are many who say, look, North Korea at this point, they have nuclear weapons. They're not going to be deterred. We can talk and talk, but ultimately they're going to become a recognized nuclear power. Maybe not happily, but it will just be a fact. How does Japan deal with that strategically?
Well, Lloyd is quite correct that Japan has long had the ability to develop atomic weapons. In fact, during the Second World War, they actually had an atomic bomb. They had not one, but 2 atomic bomb projects underway. Didn't get too far. And Japan has the missiles. It has plutonium. It has certainly the technical capacity to put together a nuclear weapon in short order and probably build up an effective retaliatory capability within a couple of years at most, faster if we help them. But the Japanese government has been considering the possibility of doing this for decades. And time again, they've thought that the costs would outweigh the benefits. As long as they can rely upon the United States has far greater capabilities in the nuclear realm than Japan has, or ever could even hope to develop. Atomic nuclear umbrella that the United States has put over Japan served during the Cold War when they faced a much more severe nuclear threat from the Soviet Union. So it's worked in the past. And if Japan were actually to nuclearize, that is to acquire its own independent nuclear capability, this would create a whole host of problems. It would create a domestic crisis inside of Japan itself, because there are many people who are deeply, deeply committed against it, and will create a diplomatic crisis between Japan and its neighbors, beginning with China. North Korea might even create an incentive for North Korea to become more belligerent against Japan before it develops that ability. Problem with Russia. Problem with South Korea, which, despite being a common democracy and a common ally, many common interests with Japan, doesn't fully trust Japan, would even create certain problems with the United States. Given these realities, as long as it's possible to rely upon the U.S. nuclear umbrella, Japan would prefer to do that.
Yuki Tatsumi in Tokyo, is there a situation in which the interests of Japan and the United States might separate, might be different here?
Well, I think that is the approach that I do believe that North Korea is pursuing. We usually call it decoupling. That by North Korea demonstrating the capability that it can really now hit continental United States, it would put the question in front of American leaders of would we in the United States are willing to sacrifice, say, Guam or LA in exchange of protecting Tokyo or other parts of Japan. Right now, I think U.S. and Japan are very focused on making sure that that kind of a perception gap doesn't occur. They continue to work together on the enhancing Japan's missile defense capabilities, as Amatoko said earlier in the program. And Japan also continues to invest in its own defense. So then it just this kind of a conversation would definitely take place in the context of the U.S.-Japan alliance consultation, and then I'm pretty certain that this kind of issue does come up when the Prime Minister Abe talks to President Trump after the every single action of the North Korean provocation. So for now, I don't detect any sense that the Japanese are very, very worried about this. But that's certainly North Korea's goal, though. So North Korean goals, though, to create such a suspicion on the part of Japanese, and certainly to some extent on the part of Americans.
Thomas Berger, what about the decoupling possibility? It sounds like a nightmare scenario.
Well, it's a very
would be LA or Tokyo. How would that emerge?
Well, I mean, we can imagine various types of scenarios, but we could imagine some sort of incident on the border between South Korea and North Korea developing. It could escalate. So let's say the North Koreans sink a South Korean ship again, as they did in 2010. This time the South Koreans retaliate. The North Koreans then launch attacks all along the DMZ, the 38th parallel. U.S. forces then would begin to deploy into all the U.S. forces in South Korea, but we would be using our bases to launch airstrikes, our bases in Japan, but Yokohama. And then we could imagine the North Koreans could launch a strike against one of those bases, let's say against Yokosuka, which is a major U.S. naval base near Yokohama. And if they were to use conventional weapons, I'm sure we would retaliate with conventional weapons, but then there's the fear that North Korea, this is a complete science fiction scenario, but North Korea could use weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, or even an atomic weapon against, let's say, U.S. military facilities, and then warn the United States, if you retaliate with nuclear weapons against North Korea, we will take out LA. In that moment, we're incredibly risky and scenario and dangerous thing for North Korea to do. But in that moment, you could see them trying to drive a wedge between the United States and Japan and South Korea. So that's the kind of nightmare scenario.
We're talking about the pressure the North Korea nuclear crisis puts on Japan, the U.S.-Japan alliance. I'm Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point. Brian in Lexington, Kentucky. Thank you for calling, Brian. You're on the air.
Hi, Tom. I think we all need to take a deep breath, not get into an arms race. Japan really needs to depend on the U.S. to lead this thing, and build the United Nations a bit more pressure to North Korea as well as India, their second largest trading partner. And we need to get the IAEA in there. We need to get the whole world behind our side, including Russia and China, India, all the United Nations, and all of NATO. And we need to have complete change, elimination of the nuclear program. Because all else failed, we need to overthrow the government and get rid of the current leadership. And that's just what needs to be done. We don't need but we have one atmosphere to share one small planet. I call this thing Operation One Small Planet when all this started. And the whole world needs to be involved. We got to share one atmosphere.
Brian, we've got it, and we're breathing it, and I appreciate your call. The stakes are high here. Deep breath sounds like a great idea. At the same time, Thomas Berger, there Japan sits with so much at stake. I mean, they're not far from North Korea, and they don't have their own counter capacity at this point. So I just wonder about the pressure this puts on their existing posture and how much change appears possible, or even likely how soon.
Well, I think that, as Makoko and Yuki have pointed out, everyone in Japan is taking a deep breath. And we had that first missile test flying over Hokkaido. So the response to Japan was Masaka, which means I can't believe it. And then the second time it was Mataka. What, again? And people are sort of taking it in their stride. Japan Japan has lived with a nuclear threat before. I mean, North Korea has not had nuclear weapons, but they've had the ability to cause problems for Japan. Soviet Union had ability to annihilate Japan. China, since 1964, has had the ability to attack Japan. South Korea has been living on the edge of the volcano for decades. So it is possible for countries to come to terms with this kind of situation and not panic.
Yuki, does Japan have the capacity to push for the diplomatic channel to open even wider and more effectively on North Korea? Do they have diplomatic leverage here?
Unfortunately, that's where their dilemma starts, because particularly with the Prime Minister Abe, that he put so much emphasis on the what we know, what people in Tokyo know as an abductee issue, which is the North Korea kidnapping a Japanese citizen to train their own agents, which occurred 30 or so years ago, and there are still some Japanese citizens who are kept in North Korea. And Prime Minister Abe put so much stake on this, and it was actually on this issue that he became a political rising star in Japan, that Japan conditioned everything in its engagement with North Korea with the resolution, what they call as a resolution of the abductee issue. But no one has quite defined what that resolution would look like for Japan. And for now, Japan's official stance is that we need to have an accurate account for every single person that we, the Japanese government, has confirmed is missing in North Korea. But what you really don't know whether that's even feasible at this point, because
and all that at this point overshadowed increasingly by the nuclear question itself, even though that's a deeply emotional issue in Japan, and we understand that very well. Yuki Tatsumi, Senior Associate of the East Asia Program at the Stimson Center, with us today from Tokyo. Thank you very much for joining us, Yuki.
Thank you for having me.
And Thomas Berger, Professor of International Relations at Boston University. It's great to have you with us today. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
When we come back, we'll talk with Evan Osnos. He's just back from North Korea, thinking about the center of all this. I'm Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point.
1 minute after 5 in the morning.
Nikki Haley says the Trump administration is not looking for war.
1 minute after noon.
Birth dates and address histories were among the data stolen by hackers.
1 minute after 5 in the evening.
The U.S. Embassy in Eritrea says it will no longer issue business and tourism visas.
1 minute after 11 at night.
The poverty rate moved down to 12.7%.
What's happening? What's known? What's next? 1 minute after the hour. Every hour, every day. From NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from Lumber Liquidators, a proud sponsor of NPR, offering more than 400 styles, including hardwood, bamboo, laminate, and vinyl, with flooring specialists in hundreds of stores nationwide. More at lumberliquidators.com or 1-800-HARDWOOD.
NPR is dedicated to news that keeps you informed. From our bureaus in Beijing to Los Angeles, NPR's on. Tune in.
Major champions. Sergio Garcia. What's kept up? This one from Jordan Speed. Justin Thomas does it today. Turn their attention to a bigger prize. He has done it. It's the FedEx Cup. Rory McIlroy has won the Tour Championship. And the $32 million that go along with it. The stakes are high when golf's playoffs conclude with the Tour Championship. Hear live tournament coverage on PGA Tour Radio, Sirius 208 XM92, and the Sirius XM app.
Support for On Point comes from College Vine, where college mentors selected from Harvard, Stanford, Duke, and other schools work with high school students through near-peer mentorship to help students discover their passions, build resumes, and start the college application process. collegevine.com/NPR. And Geico, offering motorcycle and RV insurance. More information available on motorcycle and RV insurance at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO.
This is On Point. Well, in all the hard and frightening talk of war and nuclear attack, how well do Washington and Pyongyang actually understand each other? Not well, writes the New Yorker's Evan Osnos after a recent visit to North Korea. He is with us. You can join us. What's your question from a top flight reporter just back from North Korea? We're at 1-800-423-8255. 800-423-TALK. Lots of talk over the weekend and, of course, for weeks now about North Korea.
was Secretary of State, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson yesterday on CBS's Face the Nation with a message for the North Korean regime.
Our strategy has been to undertake this peaceful pressure campaign, we call it, enabled by the four no's. The four no's being that we do not seek regime change, we do not seek a regime collapse, we do not seek an accelerated reunification of the peninsula, and we do not seek a reason to send our forces north of the demilitarized zone.
All the no's, all the things the U.S. doesn't want to do, which should be, the Secretary of State indicating there, reassuring to North Korea. Here was Nikki Haley, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, where the president is today, big speech tomorrow. She was yesterday on CNN's State of the Union, asked about North Korea. She said that the U.S. is trying all diplomatic means, then asked if she stood by President Trump's threat to unleash fire and fury on Pyongyang. She basically said yes, saying when diplomats stop talking, the generals step in.
I think that the fire and fury, while he said this is what we can do to North Korea, we wanted to be responsible and go through all diplomatic means to get their attention first. If that doesn't work, General Mattis will take care of it.
Well, that sounds simple, but of course it's not. Joining us now from Washington is Evan Osment, staff writer for The New Yorker. In North Korea, in late August, his letter from Pyongyang ran in last week's issue. It's called On the Brink. Could Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump goad each other into nuclear war? You can find a link to that at our website, onpointradio.org. Evan Osment, welcome back to On Point. Thanks very much for being here.
Hi, Tom.
Your piece has been read all over the place, people talking about it like crazy, and you've been talking about it a lot. As you speak with Americans about the North Korean situation, are Americans asking the right questions? What are you being asked that you are happy for, or what's missing in it?
Well, I think the question that comes up most urgently is a good question, and a lot of people have asked me whether Kim Jong-un is crazy. That is, I think, the thing that people are struggling to understand. Why would a leader of a country pursue a confrontation with the United States that could so obviously threaten his own regime's existence and his people's livelihood and their health and their future? And the answer is that he is, by all accounts, meaning according to the U.S. intelligence community, according to the national security community, and based on my own experiences in Seoul and Beijing and in Pyongyang over the course of the last month and a half, is that he's not crazy in the way that we think that. He's not mad, but he is pursuing a very confrontational approach to promoting what he regards as his own national interest. And first and foremost in his mind is protecting his regime's ability to defend against an American attack. So for him, that's number one, and that means being very, very aggressive.
You write about the risk of nuclear war. Is there some restraint that you can feel on both sides here that in the end would lead North Korea away from actually using these weapons and put severe constraints on the U.S. when we get into that realm? Or are we really on the cliff's edge?
I think you make a crucial point. I actually think that we are not as close to the edge as it can feel to us every day when we flip on the TV or reading the latest headlines. The truth is that on both sides there is a recognition of the profound, literally unique risks associated with the moment that we're talking about if you're actually talking about a nuclear exchange. And I'll give you a specific example. On the North Korean side, he will do these extremely provocative things. They'll threaten us with all kinds of rhetorical mayhem about breaking the windpipes of the Yankees and so on. But if you actually look at the conduct of Kim Jong-un's regime over the last few years, there is a tendency for them to threaten a lot and then to actually not do the most provocative things. Specifically, they threatened to attack South Korean NGOs, non-government organizations that were pushing propaganda literature into North Korea. But when it came time to it, they didn't actually attack the NGOs. They attacked the balloons that come across the border, which is a very benign, kind of isolated way of expressing their rage. In the case of the United States, we called for fire and fury, as the president did. The idea that he would bring violence to North Korea, but he is, in the end, operating under the same principles of mutually assured destruction that have governed the nuclear arsenal since 1945. There is
reassuring, if we can use that word, in Pyongyang, your time in Pyongyang? And what did you find most unnerving of it?
I'll start with the unnerving side because there's a lot of that, and I think it's worth telling people about it because it's unusual. I mean, when you go anywhere in Pyongyang, there is a reminder of one kind or another of the possibility of war. So on billboards beside the street, or you'll see on billboards you'll see pictures of missiles crashing into the U.S. Capitol, or my host, which was the foreign ministry, took me down into the subway system in Pyongyang and said this is where we would go in the event of a nuclear strike. It's designed to defend it. So that's unnerving because it just seems like their level of fixation on the possibility of war is so profound. However, it's useful to remind ourselves there's a domestic political purpose and a foreign relations purpose for them in promoting that message. They want to promote the idea for domestic purposes that the U.S. is an existential threat. That's how they gain strength and maintain strength at home, keep people focused around a regime even when their lifestyle trail behind the rest of the world. And then they also, of course, want to project this very tough image to the world. The encouraging thing is that life goes on in North Korea, and I think this is the hardest part for people to picture from far away. It's such a closed and secretive and paranoid country. They don't let anybody in to see it very often, and as a result, we don't have much of a picture of it. But I can tell you that when you're there, you're not gripped by a sense that these are people in a suicidal, sort of mesmerized by a suicidal mission, the way that we have become accustomed to seeing in jihadist movements. And we've almost become used to the idea that there are people who see valor in suicide. And that's not North Korea. People there are watching smuggled South Korean film and television, and they are trying to imitate the styles that they see outside the country. And there's a black market in real estate where people are buying and selling apartments outside of state control. So there is this, in some ways, outside of the nuclear confrontation, there is an aspiration for life, and that's crucial. That's absolutely vital in understanding it.
So take a call or two for you, Evan, if I may. Jim in New York, Saratoga, New York. Jim, you're on the air with Evan Osnes.
Hi, Tom. I'm pretty excited about the situation, mainly because of who we have as president now. And I noticed that the guy on the internet this morning, it was either CNN or MSNBC, reported that Russia and China were going to conduct joint naval maneuvers off the North Korean coast. And I'm wondering, is that designed to scare us off, or was it designed to intimidate North Korea?
That's interesting. I'm reading that same report here, Jim, from The Independent, that Russia and China have begun at this point big military drills less than 100 miles from the North Korean border. You've got Chinese warships in Peter the Great Bay, just outside the Russian port of Vladivostok, for joint naval exercises that will extend into the Sea of Okhotsk north of Japan. Evan, I don't know if that's beyond your strategic purview here, but who are they speaking to with these exercises?
Well, I don't know specifically, but I can tell you that my suspicion is that these are more intended to send a message to the United States than they are to North Korea, partly because China and Russia have been actually facilitating North Korea's ability to get around sanctions. They have been, as you know, they've been putting the brakes on efforts to put greater pressure on North Korea. Some of that is changing. They are allowing more pressure on the North Korean regime, but right now it would be strategically inconsistent of them to be wanting to send too much of a threat to the North Korean government. They may be sending a modest threat, but ultimately when China and Russia act together, and I've seen this over a number of years of living and working in Asia, it is generally intended to send a message to the United States, which is usually back off.
You don't have free range here. Artem in Charlotte, North Carolina. You're on with Evan Osnes. Thanks for calling.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Evan, glad you don't think Kim Jong-un is crazy. I agree with you. To kind of add to your last caller, isn't this a conversation about China, Russia, and the United States? Don't you think if we all lined our interests up and we got together, we can get North Korea to calm down, maybe give up the nuclear weapons? I feel like we've been starving them for 50 years. What can we expect from a sovereign country? And don't they need their nationalistic pride like every other country?
if China, the U.S., and Russia all align their strategic interests, that's a big if. But we'll look at it. I appreciate your call. I'm Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point. Evan, that's asking for a lot, but you did a plea.
Well, it's a key point, which is the role of China and Russia. I think the idea that we would get all three of our strategic interests aligned is probably a heavy lift. But in the short term, and I'm writing about this right now, as a matter of fact, China is evolving on this question. I mean, China is beginning to see the situation in slightly different terms than it did even a couple of years ago. As many people know, China and North Korea used to regard themselves as lashed together, allies that were in lockstep. The old phrase was that they were, in Chinese, as close as lips and teeth. Yeah. And that's no longer the case. The truth is, China now regards North Korea's behavior as a real risk in the region, and for that reason, China is willing to put more pressure on North Korea. Not what the U.S. wants, but more pressure, and that's a meaningful change.
But toward what? I mean, after spending time in Pyongyang, do you believe that North Korea would give up its nuclear weapons program? And if not, then how do we get to a sort of a safe-feeling, tolerable space here?
I don't believe they'll give up their nuclear program, and I think that's clear. My visit left absolutely no doubt of that, and it's confirmed by everybody who I've talked to who has substantive contact with North Korea and studies it in a serious way. So what are we going for? Well, the answer is it's going to be some form of de-escalation in the very short term and then containment in the long term. What that means is trying to get them to stop regarding their encounter with the United States as a trajectory towards war. That's the first step, meaning some form of diplomatic contact, some form of the lowest level of reassurance. Look, we're not going to get into a situation where the President of the United States is sitting down with Kim Jong-un. That's not going to happen for a long time. And the reason it's not going to happen is that it would require everything else has been achieved before, and that's sort of your closing round. But what could happen is trying to get them to freeze their program, to stop testing, to agree to some terms under which they would continue to develop their program. That's the reasonable goal in order to build some sort of coexistence framework, deterrence and containment. That's where we're headed.
And yet, your headline is all about risk, and he ends up really talking about brinkmanship. You say, in 18 years of reporting, I've never felt as much uncertainty at the end of a project, a feeling that nobody, not the diplomats, the strategists, or the scholars who have devoted their lives to the subject, is able to describe with confidence how the other side thinks. That's kind of incredible. What's the biggest gap in comprehension or the dimensions of it that you see?
In some ways, both sides are dealing with a black box on the other. On the American side, very knowledgeable scholars in the government, analysts, people who have studied Korea for a very long time, and then some others who are national security generalists, but at the very highest levels. People like H.R. McMaster, who spoke to me for the piece. I mean, they are looking across at North Korea, and they don't know the answer to the most essential question, the most basic question, which is, what does Kim Jong-un want? Does he really just want self-defense, or would he in fact use the nuclear arsenal to reinvade South Korea or to push the United States off the peninsula? That's a huge unknown. If you can't answer that question about your adversary, then you're dealing on very uncertain ground beneath your feet. And on the North Korean side, they're looking at Donald Trump, and they don't know the most basic question. They don't know the answer to the most basic question, which is, under what terms would he actually use nuclear weapons? With previous presidents, they've been confident that the president would not use nuclear weapons, but Donald Trump has deliberately, by his own description, sought to project unpredictability, and for that reason, they are very confused, partly because they see multiple voices coming out of Washington. They see that it's not just the president who talks, but sometimes Secretary of State, sometimes Secretary of Defense, and oftentimes with different messages. So there is a gulf of incomprehension on both sides that surprised me, and I was a little bit uneasy about the questions that the North Koreans were asking me about the United States, because they suggested that there are a lot of big gaps in their awareness.
Just got half a minute. Donald Trump has has indicated that confusion or uncertainty can be used to advantage. Does it look that way to you?
No, I'm afraid. I think that uncertainty in this case is not helping his cause. It's making it harder, and sending a clear single message would be the best thing that the United States could do at this point.
Evan Osnos back from Pyongyang and North Korea and writing at length, very strikingly in the New Yorker on his experience and observations there. On the Brink is the headline. Evan Osnos with us from Washington. Thank you very much for being with us today.
My pleasure, Tom.
Listeners, you can continue this conversation with the On Point podcast at our website, onpointradio.org. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at On Point Radio. We're there for you and right here every day. Thanks for joining us. I'm Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point.
Some ability to pressure North Korea, and China, of course, is going to be a big part of however that gets done.
Right. So now the Secretary of State did meet with his Russian counterpart last night, and according to the State Department, one of the things they talked about, I guess, was moving forward in Syria. I'm not quite sure where they're going with that, but what does the White House expect to take away from this week? Anything in particular? More commitments to
turn left,
Korea, or anything solid, concrete?
I would look for some kind of statement to come out of the Latin American leaders meeting tonight, Tim, from the White House. We've been given some firm expectations that there might be some kind of deliverable coming out of that, maybe a statement of condemnation of what's happening with Maduro in that country, also maybe some kind of action against the Cuban government for the diplomats that have been attacked in the United States Embassy in Havana. That's something that's happening, I would say, in the next 24 hours or so. Of course, anticipating President Trump's speech tomorrow, his first to the United Nations General Assembly as president. Tomorrow morning, looking forward to that, where the White House will emphasize sovereignty, international security, American goals, but also the reform, as we heard from the president and from the UN, the Secretary General. Reform is the watchword right now for the United Nations. They seem to agree on that much at least. So looking for what they can announce. I think we're going to see some movement on Latin America, especially after the dinner tonight. Some more on reform, and we'll see what kind of President Trump shows up tomorrow, Tim, as we're expecting these remarks to take place. It's about 30 minutes, anticipating that this speech has been written.
In 1/4 of a mile, bear right onto I-278 East toward Brooklyn-Queens Expressway.
To the prepared remarks, so not sure if there are any other major deliverables. We've been given some.
In stock market history was the crash of 1987. A new book by financial reporter Diana Henriquez asks if any lessons have been learned from it.
We're right back where we started, only with exponentially larger scale and risks.
And a homeowner whose home has flooded several times is suing the city of Houston.
Unfortunately, ours is a man-made issue because of development of steroids in the area.
Coming up, here now.
The news is first.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. President Trump tells reporters they'll see very soon whether he pulls the U.S. out of the nuclear deal with Iran that was struck during the Obama administration. On the eve of his first address to the UN General Assembly in New York, Trump appeared alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today, who praised Trump's criticism of the Iran deal.
I look forward to discussing with you how we can address together what you rightly call is the terrible
nuclear deal with Iran and how to roll back Iran's growing aggression in the region, especially in Syria.
The Iranian government warns the U.S. stands to suffer if it withdraws from the agreement, which drops sanctions against Iran in exchange for Tehran's commitment to halt its nuclear program. President Trump is also calling for an overhaul of the international body. His remarks at a Washington-sponsored gathering this morning underscore a long-held belief that the UN is weak and in need of reform. That includes spending cuts, he says. Trump is due to meet with the leader of France, and tonight he hosts a dinner for Latin American leaders. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is joining the UN General Assembly meetings in New York this week and plans to meet with President Trump on Thursday. NPR's Peter Kenyon reports Erdogan has made the fight over Rohingya Muslims a top priority.
Erdogan has railed against the West for not doing enough to respond to the brutal violence against the Rohingya in western Myanmar. The Turkish Red Crescent is among the aid groups distributing food in Bangladesh, where many Rohingya have fled. Turkey says it will also build a camp there to house 100,000 refugees. Erdogan's visit also comes amid strained ties with the U.S. Some of Erdogan's bodyguards were indicted for beating protesters during his last visit to the U.S., and another case accuses Turkish officials of conspiring to evade sanctions against Iran. Peter Kenyon, NPR News, Istanbul.
Forecasters continue to watch Hurricane Jose for possible impacts to the U.S. Atlantic coast. NPR's Sarah McCammon reports a storm is making its presence known today in parts of North Carolina.
Jose is still well east of the Atlantic coast, but it's creating some choppy waters. North Carolina's Outer Banks, a string of barrier islands that are popular with tourists, are no stranger to heavy winds and rain. As Jose moves through the region, state transportation officials are warning residents and visitors to slow down and watch for flooded roads. Water and sand have swept over roadways in several areas, including one of the larger islands, Hatteras. So far, no major storm damage has been reported there. Forecasters say Jose could bring heavy rain and coastal flooding to the Mid-Atlantic and New England in the coming days. Sarah McCammon, NPR News, Virginia Beach.
Meanwhile, islands across the Eastern Caribbean are bracing for what could be a second devastating hurricane in less than 2 weeks. Hurricane Maria has grown into a Category 3 storm with top winds of 120 miles per hour. You're listening to NPR News. The Stephen King horror story that turned a clown into a child's worst nightmare is at it again. The second on-screen adaptation of the author's novel, It, dominated box office ticket sales for a second straight weekend. NPR's Trina Williams says it raked in roughly $60 million.
The remake of the 1990 TV miniseries is still setting records. It becomes the highest-grossing September release with nearly $220 million in global sales.
I saw something. There was this clown.
Yeah, I saw him too. A not-so-friendly clown and the evil it represents is confronted by a group of misfit children in the film. The two new wide releases this weekend, American and Mother, offered no serious challenge for It, debuting with much lower sales for second and third place on the chart. Home Again and Hitman's Bodyguard both dropped, finishing in the fourth and fifth spots. Trina Williams, NPR News.
There's still a lot of water cooler talk about Sunday's Emmy Awards, and two TV creators scored different, significant firsts in comedy. NPR's Linda Holmes says the wins for Donald Glover and Lena Waithe have been a long time coming. Donald Glover created Atlanta for FX, and he became the first black director to win for directing a comedy series. Lena Waithe and Aziz Ansari won the comedy series writing Emmy for Master of None on Netflix, and she's the first black woman to win in that category. As NPR's Linda Holmes reporting, the Dow is up 75 points. This is NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include C3 IoT, enabling corporate and industrial digital transformation with artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and IoT big data software solutions. Learn more at c3iot.com.
Next Planet Money is at a kind of speed dating for economists, but they're not looking for dates, they're looking for jobs.
22 interviews in 3.5 days.
And then on How I Built This, we meet the guy who created Sam Adams beer. I wanted to create a beer revolution and declare beer independence for the United States. I'm Guy Raz.
And I'm Robert Smith. Join us for Planet Money.
Followed by How I Built This from NPR. Tuesday morning at 7 East, 4 West on NPR Now.
this hour in St. Louis, where protesters led a silent march this morning after more than 80 people were arrested last night in the third day of protests, where a judge found former officer Jason Stockley, who is white, not guilty of first-degree murder in the 2011 fatal shooting of motorist Anthony Lamar Smith, who is black. Stockley maintains his innocence. He said he feared Smith posed a threat to his life because Smith refused to put up his hands and reached along a seat to where a gun was found. The prosecutors questioned police accounts of a gun, and the head of the NAACP St. Louis is asking the Justice Department to immediately review the acquittal. Meanwhile, last night's arrest occurred after sunset when the official peaceful protest ended and turned violent, with some protesters smashing windows, overturning trash cans. Police say they were throwing rocks and chemicals at police. Some reporters and protesters tweeted out, though, that they were fenced in by police. The AP and photojournalist David Carson reported hearing police chanting, "Whose streets? Our streets," in the fashion of the Black Lives Matter movement. So that was last night. Nancy Fowler, reporter with St. Louis Public Radio, was at the protest this morning. Nancy, what was the atmosphere there?
Yeah, so people began gathering in downtown St. Louis, right across from the main post office, about 7 o'clock, and people seemed to be feeling there was a sense of ease and just being there, being present for a march whose destination was really unknown by even some of the people in it, as well as, of course, the observers.
Well, tell us more about this case. It started with a police chase. The police were chasing Mr. Smith's car. The officer, Jason Stockley, made some comments on tape, and there was a gun involved. Remind us.
Yeah, like you said, it was 2011, and Anthony Lamar Smith was suspected of drug dealing, and that led to a high-speed police chase by officer at the time, Jason Stockley, and his partner. And minutes before, the officers stopped Smith's car by running into it. Stockley was reported on the police car cam saying, "We're going to kill this, don't you know?" Shortly after that, Stockley fired several shots at Smith. 15 seconds, apparently, after he got out of the police car. And yes, a gun was found in Smith's car, and it only had Stockley's DNA on it.
So the prosecutors claimed that he had placed it there. Mr. Smith's DNA was not on the gun in the car.
That's correct. That's what they're saying.
Well, the judge in the case, Judge Timothy Wilson, said he agonized over the decision. But why did he make the decision?
Well, he just found that basically the evidence did not rise to the level of the charges, that there just wasn't enough evidence to meet those benchmarks.
Yeah. So what are organizers of these protests saying they will do now?
They seem to have come into this very organized, with lessons learned from the Ferguson protests. They are planning to do something every day, often more than once a day. They say they have a goal for each event, and that they are planning to peacefully protest from here until some unknown time.
Look, we learned over the weekend that U2, the band, canceled its upcoming St. Louis concert. What's the general feeling in St. Louis about the verdict, about the upset around the verdict, and about what it might mean for the city?
Well, of course it's mixed, as is, St. Louis is a very divided city, so I'm sure there are those who, just upset about the concert. But then there are people, many people, understand that economic impact is the way to make a difference, and they believe that the more that happens, the more that they will be heard. And yes, other people feel inconvenienced.
Prepare to bear right.
Feel angry, perhaps, if they don't understand what it is the protesters are doing and why they're doing it.
It's Nancy Fowler, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Nancy, thank you.
Thank you, Robin.
Well, President Trump is in New York today for the UN General Assembly. He will speak at the UN tomorrow, an organization he's had tough words for in the past. Here he is during the campaign.
The United Nations is not a friend of democracy. It's not a friend to freedom. It's not a friend even to the United States of America.
In a half a mile, bear right.
Joining us now is NPR senior Washington editor and correspondent Ron Elving. Hi, Ron.
Hey, Jeremy.
And do you expect the president to keep up his criticism of the UN tomorrow during his speech?
Yes, but in a much milder and more muted fashion. We got a little preview of that this morning when he popped in on a meeting on UN reform there in New York. The General Assembly is already underway. today, and he made some remarks about how the United Nations needs to get reformed and needs to downsize, but this was not entirely out of line with some of the statements we've heard from the new Secretary General.
Follow the road for 7 miles.
Of the UN, and they seem to have a warm handshake together. And so the president was not being as harsh as he was in front of some of those rallies, and certainly not engaging in that America First rhetoric that we have sometimes heard.
Still, how do you think he'll be received tomorrow during his speech at the UN? Do you expect some countries to walk out or sit on their hands or anything like that?
More likely to sit on their hands than walk out. Cool reception, perhaps. He certainly has been very, very harsh with the organization in the past. He's talked about how it doesn't really serve any of its ends and is corrupt, and that is not going to be the message they hear tomorrow, but they may be protesting a message they've heard previously. Most of them, though, I think are going to listen to him quite seriously and politely, because at this particular moment, the real crisis facing the United Nations is not an internal one, and it's not Donald Trump, it's North Korea and what to do about North Korea.
One issue that will surely come up during the UN General Assembly is the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, the president has said the U.S. is going to withdraw from that deal, but over the weekend there was a report in the Wall Street Journal that maybe the administration is changing its mind and might stay in. What's going on here?
A lot of people think that the Wall Street Journal has a pretty good pipeline into the White House, and this is another one of those issues where the official White House position seems to be at odds with what comes leaking out from some elements within the White House. And there may be some method in this apparent confusion, because the administration likes to have some of these issues both ways. They can talk to people who feel we should be going forward with our commitment to the Paris Agreement, even after having announced it, that we are going to pull out, and thereby pleasing the base voters for Donald Trump last year, many of whom seem to have felt that climate agreement was not favorable to the United States and had been told that by Donald Trump.
Ron, what about the political story that dominated the news last week? Trump's possible second deal with the Democrats in as many weeks. Listen here to Republican strategist Alex Castellanos on ABC's This Week. He said he sees this, Trump's doing deal with the Democrats, as the beginning maybe of a three-party system in the U.S.
But he's figured out that if there's a three-party race in 2020, he can win with
First of all,
always and that's the geometry. The Republicans may take a beating in 2018, but you're right, Donald Trump won't.
The suggestion there is that he can win with 40. If you couldn't hear what Alex Castellanos was saying, he's saying, you know, if he splits it up into the Trumpians, the Republicans, and the Democrats, he does pretty well.
If you believe that he would always have 40, even if he were losing those Republicans who voted for him in 2016, just because he was the Republican nominee. If you reduce him just to his hard base, which may be 40, and if you look at the polls today, maybe a little south of 40, that would seem to give him at least a fighting chance in a three-way race, but it would also assume that there was not a party anywhere that was seen as opposed to both Donald Trump and the Republicans, and I think the Democratic Party might audition for that role in 2020.
But I guess the bigger question here is, has anybody figured out what he's up to here with doing deals with the Democrats?
No, I don't think anyone quite knows exactly what he thinks he's doing, or whether it is part of a grand strategy, or whether it's just how he feels on Wednesday and then how he feels on Thursday. So Chuck and Nancy, that would be Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic leaders of the Senate and House respectively, become his besties one day, and then the next day he is sending out a completely different message on Twitter, and then yet another message through some of his various surrogates.
Meanwhile, Senate Republicans are considering one last effort to try to repeal Obamacare. Leadership has been making a quiet push to gain support for the Graham-Cassidy bill. These are two Republican senators, which would replace some of Obamacare's payments to states with block grants and shrink overall funding. Do the votes exist for this?
The votes aren't there yet. We are told they have something like 47 or 48. They need 50 in order to get Mike Pence's tie-breaking vote involved. They were not able to get the 50 on any of the other versions of repeal and replace that they have brought to the floor. We know they don't have 50 quite yet because Rand Paul is out and several other senators have not committed one way or another. That includes Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. Both of their states would lose a lot of their Medicaid expansion money, that's Medicaid, expansion money. That would be the main reason that they probably voted against those earlier versions. Plus, we still don't know for certain there wouldn't be some of the conservatives joining Rand Paul, because this particular version of repeal and replace would not repeal all of the Obamacare tax limits.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that. Ron, just in the 30 seconds we have left,
Prepare to bear left.
This tweet that President Trump sent out, a retweet of him hitting a golf ball that hits Hillary Clinton, doctored video. I feel like if any other president did that, this would be the story for the week.
Well, he does it because he's Donald Trump, and he finds it amusing, and he thinks that his Twitter followers will as well, and he gets away with it because he's right about many of those followers. And besides that, what does it even mean to get away with something in 2017?
That's NPR senior Washington editor and correspondent Ron Elving. Ron, thanks as always.
Thank you, Jeremy.
You're listening to Here and Now.
5 in the morning.
Nikki Haley says the Trump administration is not looking for war.
1 minute after noon.
Birth dates and address histories were among the data stolen by hackers.
1 minute after 5 in the evening.
The U.S. Embassy in Eritrea says it will no longer issue business and tourism visas.
1 minute after 11 at night.
In a half a mile, bear left and continue following I-295 south toward Wilmington.
Every hour, every day. From NPR News.
I'm Sharon Brody. The U.S. Navy has fired 2 senior commanders in the Pacific region in connection with recent deadly collisions of Navy ships. As part of the sweeping leadership in the Japan-based fleet, tomorrow the top U.S. Navy officer and the Navy Secretary are scheduled to go to Capitol Hill for a hearing on the crashes. A federal lawsuit in Ohio alleges Columbus police used excessive force when they arrested a man this month with cell phone video showing officers kicking and punching him. The lawsuit also accuses the police department of continuing a pattern of excessive force against civilians and, in particular, black residents. Hurricane Maria grew into a Category 3 storm today as it makes its way closer to islands in the eastern Caribbean already hit hard by Hurricane Irma. And forecasters say on Wednesday, Maria could hit Puerto Rico as a Category 3 or 4 hurricane. You're listening to Here and Now.
In a half a mile, bear left, then bear left.
Global financial resources and market expertise to clients the world over. rwbaird.com has more information.
I'm Greg Allen, NPR's Miami correspondent. From Miami to Washington, NPR keeps you informed at home and around the world. NPR is
bear left.
Yeah, I think this is a little out of date.
SiriusXM The Highway is once again taking our commitment to country music discovery on the road.
The Highway Vine Store is headed back across North America, featuring High Valley,
Ashley McBride,
and Doliak.
Bear left onto I-95 south toward Newark.
Tour dates and info.
And discover new country on SiriusXM The Highway.
Channel 56.
And streaming on the SiriusXM app.
Funding for Here and Now comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston and Geico, celebrating over 75 years of providing auto insurance for drivers across America. More information on auto insurance available at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO.
This is Here and Now. The stock market started off this Monday at a record high, a very different story than October 19th, 1987, the date that would become known as Black Monday. The market dropped by 22.6% that day, equivalent to a roughly 5,000-point loss for the Dow today. What led to that crash is the subject of longtime New York Times financial reporter Diana Henriquez's new book. It's called A First-Class Catastrophe, The Road to Black Monday, the Worst Day in Wall Street History. Diana Henriquez, welcome back to Here and Now.
Wonderful to be here, Jeremy.
And we've talked to you about your other book, about Bernie Madoff. What made you want to dive into this crisis?
Well, the 30th anniversary, as you know, Jeremy, is coming up. And talking with younger people in my circle, even younger financial reporters, I was astonished at how little they knew about the 1987 crash. I lived through it myself as a reporter,
But the mythology that has grown up around Black Monday is really an amazing monument to Wall Street amnesia, let me tell you. People will tell you, oh, it was no big deal, oh, it was over in a day, it was one and done, and nothing could be further from the truth. So it was sort of, I kind of wanted to solve a mystery here. Why has Black Monday been so forgotten? Why have we not recognized what it was showing us and taken that to heart?
Well, why did you start your book where you did in the 70s? Because it seems to indicate that that was the beginning of what led to it.
Great question, and I'm glad you raised it, Jeremy. The book opens on the silver crisis, which was a bubble in the silver market. But what was significant about that crisis, which was in the commodity market, far from Wall Street, was the way it quickly leapt the traditional firebrands. The panic spread from market to market, from the commodity market to the brokerage industry to banks and the various regulators of all those marketplaces barely knew each other's names. So we open on a world where official Washington is still kind of trapped in this delusion that there are all these isolated markets that can be regulated separately. And the silver crisis in 1980 blew that delusion apart for those who were paying attention. And then along the way, I illustrate the repeated occasions when a panic refused to stay where it was supposed to, so that by the time you arrive at Black Monday, you understand that this didn't just pop out of the clear blue sky. This was the culmination of a series of misjudgments, missteps, fundamental changes in how Wall Street worked.
Well, one of the fundamental changes was the rise of electronic trading. How big a role did that play?
It was an enormous role, and it was very unfamiliar to most investors at the time, particularly the Main Street investors, the extent to which computers were speeding the flow of orders into the markets, the speed of light. And many of those markets were still operating at what I call the speed of life, not the speed of light. They were human markets. They were trying to operate as they had operated for 100 years. And they were overwhelmed by the pace of automated order delivery. In addition, further in the background, in the shadows, beyond even the vision of alert regulators, were the use of computers to devise new destabilizing trading strategies, to create new financial derivatives that were used in imaginative and unusual ways. So the computer was a tool of the financial engineers who were creating the new products that would so affect trading on Black Monday.
I must say, as you're talking about this, it sounds kind of familiar. After having just lived through the crash of 2008, people talking about a lot of fast trading and new products that nobody understands.
You're exactly right. I mean, in 1987, there were these titan investors who used these untested derivatives in computer-driven strategies, and they nearly overwhelmed the balkanized regulatory system. Exactly the same thing happened in 2008. Too big to fail investors using untested derivatives in high-speed herd investing strategies with fragmented oversight. So we're right back where we started, only with exponentially larger scale and risks.
Now, you brought up the issue of regulators. You talk in this book about Ronald Reagan, who took office in 1981 and was pushing for smaller government, was appointing people who wanted to cut back on regulations. How much responsibility did Reagan and his administration have in the crash in 1987?
Well, it's sort of a mixed bag, Jeremy. Yes, there was a new deregulatory fever in Washington. The way that played out, however, was in skimpy rations for the regulators. So to the extent that the regulatory machinery was understaffed and underfinanced, that was a result of this determination to cut back on big government. But I should point out that after the crash, it was a blue ribbon commission appointed by President Reagan, led by staunch Republican Dick Brady, who recommended that we scrap our current regulatory system and put a unified regulator in charge in Washington. So both, the prescription for what we should do and some of the problems that gave rise to Black Monday can be traced back to these political divisions. But I should also say that the Democrats in Congress on the left in the 1980s were not really part of the solution either. They wanted more funding for regulatory agencies, true, but they failed to undertake the serious oversight of these profound changes in the marketplace.
Well, and I wonder if we can ever expect our members of Congress to be able to be good regulators of the financial industry, because it is so complicated. How can we expect them to understand all of these new products enough to oversee?
Well, that's why we need to look at the regulatory structure we have. We don't expect our politicians in Congress to understand nuclear energy, but we do expect them to adequately fund the Department of Energy and make sure that the risks that that agency oversees are adequately taken care of. I think the same thing is true of our financial markets. Yes, they are extremely complex. Yes, they are algorithm-driven, and there's lots of rocket scientists from
in a half a mile, bear left and continue following I-95 south.
Arcane and bizarre for a lot of people in the political realm, but they still have the responsibility of making sure that the regulatory agencies are structured, appropriately funded, and appropriately staffed so that it can understand what's happening on Wall Street, even if they can't.
Did you get a better understanding in writing this book of why crashes happen? How something that seems small and get out of control very quickly and spread and cause a market crash?
Yes, although it wasn't a big surprise. We've been laboring for decades under the notion of an efficient market, a rational market, where investors make rational decisions, and those decisions are incorporated into the prices of securities automatically. I never found that particularly persuasive. I've got too big an appreciation for how people panic in crisis. But after researching Black Monday, I don't understand how anyone can believe that that's an accurate explanation of how markets work. We're human beings. We bring a lot of baggage to our investment decisions. We get frightened. We indulge in wishful thinking. We ignore the red flags until it's too late. That's the nature of the human mind.
Well, and in your book, you write, quote, "Where does this leave us today, 30 years after Black Monday, exactly where we were then, in a storm-tossed lifeboat in which all the passengers are shackled together with the obnoxious crew members who carelessly steered our ship into the storm." So how likely is it, 30 years later, that we have another crash for the same reasons?
Well, we know we're going to have another financial crisis. We don't know when, but we know we will. How likely is it that we'll be ready? I will admit that I am concerned about that. I'm not sure that the focus in Washington is where it needs to be. There's a lot of talk about repealing and the Dodd-Frank law that was adopted after the 2008 crisis, tinkering with it around the edges.
Chick-fil-A.
That isn't what we need. We need the white and blackboard.
In a half a mile, bear left and continue following I-95 south.
This modern, hyper-automated, extremely complex marketplace where we find ourselves.
I'm sure a lot of people on Wall Street are going to read your book. What about people who don't work on Wall Street or don't work in the financial industry? What do you want them to take away?
I want them, first of all, to understand that this is not a mom-and-pop market. We're the mice on the elephant's dance floor here, and we need to understand our role. What I hope they will take away from the book is a clearer picture of how today's market works and how we got here. But I also hope they will realize that when the elephants are stampeding and running around with their ears on fire, what you and I should do is stay calm, stand pat and wait out the storm. And then when the dust settles, call your representative in Washington and demand that we finally get some meaningful action on regulatory reform.
It's Diana Henriquez, whose book is called A First-Class Catastrophe, The Road to Black Monday, The Worst Day in Wall Street History. Diana, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremy.
And we've got an excerpt at hereandnow.org.
With the NPR News app for your phone. Download from iTunes or Google Play.
6 years of war, more than half of Syria's people have fled their homes.
1 minute after noon.
Equifax did not maintain safeguards needed to protect data.
1 minute after 5 in the evening.
Guinea, the embassy says it will stop issuing visas to government officials.
1 minute after 11 at night.
The Rohingya militant group recently announced a ceasefire for humanitarian reasons.
What's happening? What's known? What's next? 1 minute after the hour. Every hour, every day. From NPR News.
It's easy to look at the headlines and get a sense of the news.
9 senators rejected that Senate version of the bill.
Venezuela was paralyzed by strikes and protests.
This missile can actually travel much farther than...
NPR digs into the center of the story to help you really understand not just what happens, but why. Stand with the facts. Listen every day.
NPR, always on. Funding for HERA now comes from WBUR Boston and MathWorks, creators of MATLAB and Simulink software for technical computing and model-based design. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com. And Roadside Attractions, presenting Stronger, starring Jake Gyllenhaal as Jeff Bowman, an ordinary man whose life was transformed by the Boston Marathon bombing. Also starring Tatiana Maslany, in theaters September 22nd.
This is Here and Now from NPR and WBUR. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Another powerful storm in the Atlantic is threatening Caribbean islands that were devastated by Hurricane Irma. Forecasters said today that Hurricane Maria's sustained winds are now up to 120 miles per hour, and it is bearing down on the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. Further north, Hurricane Jose is moving toward New England and bringing winds and rain with it. Joining us on Skype is meteorologist David Epstein. David, it seems like Maria is the bigger threat here. As of today, it's a major hurricane, and it's getting stronger.
That's right. So it continues to look like it's going to stay a major hurricane. And when we use the word major, it's not just we're throwing a superlative onto the hurricane. Actually, there's a technical aspect to it. A Category 3 hurricane or higher, so 3, 4, and 5, we call them major hurricanes. So that's why it's called that. Winds are forecast to become as high as 130 knots, which translates into 150 miles an hour. That should happen over the next day and a half, 2 days or so. The good thing about this, it's a little further south than Irma was, so it's not going to go over the exact same area, but any wind and rain is just not good.
But we remember that one of the reasons Puerto Rico was spared from Irma for the most part is because Irma went north of Puerto Rico. This one looks like it may hit Puerto Rico head on.
That's right. This particular storm could actually cross the island. That would tend to weaken if it does cross the island, but you are correct. The fact that Irma missed them because it went a little further north, it impacted those northern islands like Barbuda. We saw all that horrible damage there. This particular storm is headed off towards the west-northwest, but it's just south of Irma's path.
When you look at it on the satellite imagery, it doesn't look as put together as Irma. It's not quite as clear of an eye, for example.
Right, exactly. And all hurricanes don't necessarily have a completely clear eye. Well-developed ones do, but just because we don't see a clear eye doesn't mean the storm isn't necessarily well-developed with strong winds. As you mentioned, the winds are well over 100 miles an hour at this point. I suspect that it'll start to clear out this afternoon as the storm becomes better organized, and then the eye goes through replacement cycles. So it has an eye, the thunderstorms around it kind of dissipate, it creates a new eye, and those cycles continue to happen until the storm eventually either peters out or goes over land.
And what are the chances that it will eventually hit the U.S. mainland?
Well, it's not zero, that's for sure, and depending on what models we look at, it could impact the United States mainland. We just don't know once you get that far out. It just depends. I mean, there's some models that bring it very close to the southeast coast, say Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, in that area, and then curve it off towards the northeast. It may have some interaction with Jose and do what's called the Fujiwara effect, where they sort of almost dance around each other. It's like taking two dumbbells and you pull one down, the other has to go up. But it's just too early to say whether Maria is going to impact the U.S. mainland or not.
Seems like this is going to go down as a very significant hurricane season in the Atlantic.
It is definitely an active hurricane season in the Atlantic. There's no question about it. We're not as active as we were back when we had Katrina and Wilma in 2005. But one of the other aspects of this year is that we're coming off of several years of really below normal hurricane activity, far below average. And so one of the reasons for that is that we have less wind shear. There's no more El Nino, so that tends to allow these hurricanes to develop. A lot of different factors as to why we've got more hurricanes right now, but also it's comparatively much higher than the very abnormally low years we've just been through.
That's meteorologist David Epstein as we watch a number of hurricanes in the Atlantic. David, thank you.
You're welcome.
And you're listening to Here and Now.
Stories that matter to you, curated by NPR One, the app tailored to meet your specific needs. It's at one.npr.org.
On the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, President Trump has met today with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Trump says they're working very hard to reach a deal between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. Netanyahu says Israel's alliance with the U.S. has never been stronger. The French foreign minister says dissension and conflict are at their highest level since the Cold War, but cooperation among nations has become more difficult. He says world leaders are gathering at the UN General Assembly for their annual meeting at a critical moment amidst seeing a worrying degradation of the international environment. Bank of England governor says the British economy is likely to grow more slowly than its peers in the group of seven until the middle of next year. In a speech at the IMF in Washington, he says that's largely because of uncertainties related to the country's exit from the EU. You're listening to Here and Now.
1 minute after 5 in the morning.
Nikki Haley says the Trump administration is not looking for war.
1 minute after noon.
Birth dates and address histories were among the data stolen by hackers.
1 minute after 5 in the evening.
The U.S. Embassy in Eritrea says it will no longer issue business and tourism visas.
1 minute after 11 at night.
The poverty rate moves down to 12.7%.
What's happening? What's known? What's next? 1 minute after the hour. Every hour, every day. From NPR News.
Hey folks, it's Dave Ramsey, and joining me on SiriusXM Triumph is some new, life-changing, breaking news shows. We'll focus on small business, answer all your retirement questions. We've got solutions for questions on life and money, and a show on how to get the most out of your work and career. Join me along with all these exciting new shows from the Ramsey Network, weekdays, 1 Eastern, only on SiriusXM Triumph, channel 132.
Funding for Here and Now comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston, where the program is produced, and your NPR station. ADT Security, helping to protect families and homes for over 140 years. Learn more at ADT.com. And Staples, offering print and marketing solutions for business. including color copies and presentations, booklets, manuals, and signage. Details at Staples stores or staples.com/copy and print. Staples, it's pro time.
It's here and now. Lawmakers in Washington have given themselves 3 more months to reauthorize once again FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP, which was due to expire at the end of the month and is heavily in debt. Now, this is a thorny issue. National flood insurance has been around since 1968, largely because private insurers backed out of the market years ago. So the government subsidizes the cost of insurance policies to encourage people to buy them. The problem is, few people do. The pot isn't that big. Now, many people think, well, why should I buy it? The other thing that FEMA does is provide disaster assistance, which helps people rebuild. And you've by now heard that those people who do have policies, many flood over and over and are bailed out by the NFIP. Now, there's an argument, why should taxpayers bail out these repeat flooders? Over the next 2 days, we'll look at FEMA flood insurance. Today with homeowner Dean Bixler in West Houston, who bought FEMA flood insurance just because it sounded like a good idea. And he's repeatedly flooded starting in 2009. In fact, he's a member of Residents Against Flooding, which is suing the city of Houston. Dean, are you there?
Yes, I am.
And we're glad to say that your home escaped Harvey, but you flooded 3 times in the past.
That's correct.
You had flood insurance. By the way, did your neighbors all do it?
Most of my neighbors did not have flood insurance in 2009. We are not in a flood zone. Wasn't required for the mortgage, anything.
And we should say it is required for a holder of a federally backed mortgage who lives in a flood-prone area. You didn't think you lived in a flood-prone area?
No.
Well, and then you flooded 3 times. Now, first of all, let's address this idea, and you know that there are people who want to do away with the National Flood Insurance Program. They think it's actually giving people the incentive to move into flood areas because they know the government will cover them. You received payouts 3 times, $70,000 for damage in 2009, $50,000 for damage in 2015, $30,000 the third time around. But you say that's, still only half the value of your home. What would you say to people who said 3 times, 3 strikes, you shouldn't be living there?
If I lived along a river or lived along the coast, I would completely agree with them. Unfortunately, ours is a man-made issue because of development on steroids in the area. They have solutions for my flooding. They were supposed to put in detention ponds before developing the area, and they didn't.
We've reported on this, that Houston is not only completely overdeveloped and has paved over wetlands that might absorb rain, but the requirement that developers had, many have ignored, to put in, drainage ponds or to put in more wetlands. So you have launched a lawsuit.
That's correct.
Okay. So how do you feel about this debate over increasing the flood insurance, taking it away?
Mixed being I understand completely the opposition to the NFIP altogether. They are supposed to be coming out with some elevation-based survey and 2D modeling. They're going to find, because 70% of the people that flood in Houston are not in a floodplain, they're going to find that they moved that 70% of people into a special flood hazard area.
Well, let's jump in there, because FEMA is responsible for designating these flood areas, and a lot of people think the flood maps are completely wrong and due for an overhaul, and there are people in flood zones that aren't being called floodplains.
So that's exactly right. And if they put me in a flood zone, and unfortunately, one of the things with FEMA is if you're bought your house prior to a change in the flood zone, you're grandfathered until you sell that house. And as long as you keep the flood insurance policy current, the next buyer, if they keep it current, are still grandfathered, so they don't pay the rates that they would be in a flood zone.
If somebody offered you full value for your house, for you to move, would you take it? In other words, a government agency said, you know what, we've got to recognize these are flood zones, we've got to get these people out instead of keep having them flood and paying, which is a pain in the neck for you too. Would you take the value of your house to move?
Absolutely.
Dean Bixler, who owns a home in West Houston, Texas, with the group Residents Against Flooding.
Dean, thanks and best to you.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, Dean tells us he's also invested about $30,000 of his own money to flood-proof his home. Tomorrow we're going to talk with someone who studied the National Flood Insurance Program for years. He says it can and must be fixed.
The bright lights, the rush of euphoria, but acting can feel inaccessible if you have certain physical or intellectual disabilities. Stina Sieg from KJZZ introduces us to a theater company in Scottsdale, Arizona. Welcomes everyone.
Not all the actors in Detour Company Theater can snap their fingers, but those who can are during one of the final frenzied rehearsals before the opening night of, yeah, you might have guessed it, The Addams Family.
But I too am in love.
Down syndrome, autism, brain damage. Everyone in the cast has got something that keeps them from succeeding in a traditional theater setting. But here, everyone is worthy of stage time and feedback.
I love you, and I know I taught you, and you really rocked all your lives. You were so good, and you even remembered to cheat out the right way, okay?
That's Sam, Detour's founder, artistic director, and the co-director of this show, who goes by one name only. Thin and small, she bounds up and down the stage for hours and exudes Mama Bear.
Okay, and so then when you get the bird, most of all, Detour is about opportunity.
The opportunity for her cast of 40 to have what Sam calls an authentic theater experience. It means months of working hard, memorizing lines, learning choreography, and it means the opportunity for everyone to do the best they can in 2 musicals a year.
Our job is to make that learning and make that success still possible for you, even with that other thing. We all have things in our lives.
But backstage here at the Scottsdale Center for the Performing Arts, you don't really see those things. More so, you see people, happy people, like Sarah Wren.
I feel like I'm free when I'm on the stage.
And Lance Winslow.
I feel like I'm somebody who is like a real star when I'm here. You know, I'm happy to have that.
Leah Mapstead, now 23, has been part of Detour since she was a teenager, but she loved performing long before that.
When I'm on stage, I feel accomplished, I feel proud, and I feel like I'm having fun with a bunch of my friends, being somewhere I'm not for an hour and a half or so.
And Leah says they're not just friends here, they're family.
Brothers and sisters who work together as a team to put on miracles every year. Twice a year at the Scottsdale Center.
KFC, that's new.
I think I like it. I think I like it. I'm being pulled in a new.
And maybe the miracles here aren't really the shows, though it is amazing that so many people of different ages and abilities can come together and create something so sweet and so fun. Maybe they're about how these productions affect everyone involved, not just the actors, but the coaches who shadow them on stage, and audience members like me who cried through the entire standing ovation of Detour's last production. Founder Sam has seen a lot of that in the 15 years she's been doing Detour.
And people leave singing, dancing, smiling, laughing.
And hopefully, there's a new understanding of the performers they saw on stage.
Because they see them as people, as actors, as entertainers, as human beings with a gift to share. That's all we are, right?
Including Sam's son, Christopher, who you might spot right away as the tall guy playing Lurch. For Here and Now, I'm Stina Sieg in Scottsdale.
have taken, oh well.
Not maintain safeguards needed
I'll eat later.
1 minute after 5 in the evening.
Guinea, the embassy says it will stop issuing visas to government officials.
1 minute after 11 at night.
The Rohingya militant group recently announced a ceasefire for humanitarian reasons.
What's happening? What's known? What's next? 1 minute after the hour. Every hour, every day. From NPR News.
NPR's Up First podcast is the news you need to start your day. The biggest stories and ideas from politics and pop culture in 10 minutes. Hosted by Rachel Martin, David Green, and Steve Inskeep, with reporting analysis from NPR News. Available weekdays by 6 a.m. East, 4 West. Subscribe to the Up First podcast at npr.org or wherever you get your podcasts.
Funding for HERA now comes from WBUR Boston and MathWorks, creators of MATLAB and Simulink software for technical computing and model-based design. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com. And Roadside Attractions, presenting Stronger, starring Jake Gyllenhaal as Jeff Collins, an ordinary man whose life was transformed by the Boston Marathon bombing. Also starring Tatiana Maslany, in theaters September 22nd.
This is Here and Now. Stranger Things and Westworld were shut out at the Emmys last night. The biggest winners were Hulu's The Handmaid's Tale and HBO's Big Little Lies, both shows with strong female leads. It was a big night for people of color as well, and politics were front and center throughout the evening. Derek Thompson,
I said
senior editor of The
10
Atlantic,
minutes
joins
for
us
that show.
from New York. Hi, Derek.
Hello, Jeremy.
And there were a lot of politics last night, from Stephen Colbert's opening monologue to Donald Glover, who made a direct comment about the president.
I want to thank Trump for making black people #1 on the most oppressed list. He's the reason I'm probably up here.
And then there was a reunion of 9 to 5 cast Dolly Parton, Jane Fonda, and Lily Tomlin. Here's Fonda and Tomlin.
Back in 1980, in that movie, we refused to be controlled by a sexist, egotistical, lying, hypocritical bigot. Really. And in 2017, we still refuse to be controlled by a sexist, egotistical, lying, hypocritical bigot.
Derek, in other award shows, we always wonder if there are going to be a lot of politics, and sometimes there aren't. But in this case, it really got political.
Donald Trump has never won an Emmy Award, but last night he was the Emmy Awards. The opening monologue was devoted to him. The speeches were about him. The best comedy went to Veep, which famously tweets its plotline to make room for Trump. Best drama with The Handmaid's Tale, a dystopian prophecy that many people considered to be of a piece with the Trump era. The show to win the most Emmys was Saturday Night Live, SNL, which had a resurgence in large part due to its political satire. And then to top it off, Alec Baldwin, who won an acting award, literally dedicated his Emmy Award to Donald Trump. And so, in many ways, this was, as always, a celebration of television and the art form and the actors and writers that make that art possible. But almost every single moment was suffused with criticism of and awareness of this specter of the president.
Including the surprise appearance by Sean Spicer, the former White House press secretary, talking about the Emmys audience. Here it is.
Watch out, vehicle stopped on shoulder ahead.
And around the world.
What you did on Inauguration Day and talking about the crowd being so big. How did people react to that?
There were two reactions that I saw. The first was rather simply, this is amusing. And you could see it on the faces of some of the members of the audience. People were shocked to see him, but were laughing as he spoke. And I recall Colbert, I think, ushered him off stage by saying, "Thank you, Melissa McCarthy." The second reaction that I saw, though, was the critical reaction among political journalists and political-minded television critics on Twitter. Sean Spicer, I think, in many ways served as an agent of purposeful disinformation. He often lied pointlessly and falsifiably about issues as straightforward as, we just heard, how big was the inaugural crowd. And I think the feeling was now 6 months later, here he is being rehabilitated as someone for whom we should laugh about the pointless fibs. So, for me, I understand both points. When I saw the moment. I did laugh, but I also understood the criticism from the left.
What does it say to you that with all of the great shows, and this is really, as we've talked about, a golden age of television right now, that The Handmaid's Tale, which is this Hulu show based on the Margaret Atwood novel about a dystopian future where women are oppressed by a totalitarian government, what does it say that that show won so many awards?
I think there's 2 points to make about The Handmaid's Tale. First is that its success was clearly a reflection of the subject matter, which many people loudly interpreted as being precious in the age of Trump, including fears of totalitarianism, a feeling of xenophobia, politicized misogyny, and then there's also the subcurrent in the plot of environmental degradation. And many people, as the show was coming out on Hulu, said, "Oh my gosh, what incredible timing for this to come out at a time when so many are worried that all these issues are going to be an intrinsic part of our politics." The second important thing to point out is that it's just a great show. It was critically acclaimed. Elizabeth Moss was fantastic, and there were lots of other shows, as you said at the top, Stranger Things, Westworld, that were similarly critically acclaimed but didn't necessarily win the Emmys. So I think it needed to be at the center of both of these Venn diagrams, right? To be both a critically acclaimed show and to be seen as a parable for our times. And I think obviously no show quite hit that intersection quite as hard as Handmaid's Tale.
And one more clip I want to play. This is Lena Waithe of Netflix's Master of None, who became the first African-American woman to win an Emmy for comedy writing. She said this.
And last but certainly not least, my LGBTQIA family. I see each and every one of you. The things that make us different, those are our superpowers. Every day when you walk out the door, put on your imaginary cape and go out there and conquer the world, because the world would not be as beautiful as it is if we weren't in it.
Derek, a big night for diversity at the Emmys.
Huge night for diversity at the Emmys across the acting categories and the writing. I mean, the Emmys ratified prestige television as an artistic medium.
Prepare to turn left.
Offers counter-programming to and criticism of modern politics, and you saw that celebration last night.
That's Derek Thompson, senior editor at The Atlantic. Derek, thanks as always.
Thank you.
And Here and Now is a production of NPR and WBUR in association with the BBC World Service. I'm Jeremy Hobson.
And Robin Young, this is Here and Now.
Funding for Here and Now comes from Home Advisor. In 1/4 of a mile, turn left, then turn left again. Projects from minor repairs to major remodels. Homeowners can read reviews, compare prices, and book appointments online at Home Advisor. Turn left.
I'm Robin Young. FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program is in debt, and there's a call to reform the way the country looks at flooding. For instance, the flood maps are out of date.
In some places, it's simply the case that no one knows how much flood risk properties face.
Next time, Here and Now. Fresh air. Hillary Clinton, she has a new campaign memoir. We'll talk about candidate and President Trump, chance of lock her up, Russian interference, Comey and the emails. I'll start by sharing with her my takeaway from the part of our previous interview that went viral, the part about how she came to support federal marriage equality. My takeaway is probably not what you think it is. Join us. Today at 4 p.m. East, 1 West on NPR Now.
One thing about the latest breaking news alert is that it may only confuse rather than clarify.
Premiums and deductibles for lower income
chains fell in the news of the Amazon Whole Foods deal.
To the meaning of one phrase, bona fide relationship.
That's why NPR News is making space for clear, concise journalism and memorable stories. Make some space for yourself and stand with the facts. Listen every day.
NPR, always on.
Turn left onto MD-24 South.
Software, accelerating the pace of engineering and science. Learn more at MathWorks.
In 500 feet, if possible, make a legal U-turn.
I'm Jeremy Hobson. It's Here and Now.
I'm gonna get something to eat first.
If possible, make a legal U-turn.
This week's UN General Assembly with a call to reform the UN.
We must ensure that no one and no member state
shoulders a disproportionate share of the burden, and that's militarily or financially.
Also, people in the Caribbean keep a watch on Hurricane Maria. Meanwhile, how long will it take for tourism to rebound after Irma? And
There was an explosion, and the lights are gone, bro.
4 years after the Boston Marathon bombing, Jeff Bowman's memoir, Stronger, is now a movie.
My journey is just starting. Now I'm walking better every month.
Jeff and actor Jake Gyllenhaal, coming up here now.
The news is first.
Prepare to turn right. Follow the arrow on the display. When leaving, turn left. The decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord after a weekend of suggestions that it's trying to find a way to stay in it. NPR's Ron Elving reports on the conflicting messages surrounding the Wall Street Journal's report on whether President Trump might be having a change of heart about climate change.
A lot of people think that the Wall Street Journal has a pretty good pipeline into the White House, and this is another one of those issues where the official White House position seems to be at odds with what comes leaking out from some elements within the White House. And there may be some method in this apparent confusion because the administration likes to have some of these issues both ways. They can talk to people who feel we should be going forward with our commitment to the Paris Agreement, even after that we are going to pull out, and thereby pleasing the base voters for Donald Trump.
NPR's Ron Elving reporting. Islands across the Eastern Caribbean are...
But what's not in the movie? You guys parted a little while ago.
Follow the arrow on the display. When leaving, turn left.
Say I love you, and she says good. And I'm a person. I make mistakes, but relationships are hard, and they're really hard. And I'm trying to really right now work on myself. You know, it wasn't like that for the past 3 years. It was like a whirlwind, and it still is a whirlwind. And I had so much going on with my daughter, with my recovery, and I still do. So it's right now. I see her all the time, every day, almost. As Nora, it's mainly about our daughter.
The film becomes a legacy to that. You see the two of you, people, put in this unimaginable place with such deep love and hard work. Getting through.
But you can see him. What gets me every time is the love and her by my side in the hospital and how she was. You know, she was my hero.
Well, and it sounds, Jeff, like it sounds like it's a good thing that you maybe have some time to yourself to keep working on this. People think, oh, it's over. You made a movie, you wrote a book, how great. But no. So
my journey is just starting. Yeah. Especially, you know, I'm walking better every month. Upstairs, downstairs, all day long. He likes to make fun of me. He's like, yeah, a year ago, you remember you would be sucking wind up these stairs.
Well, Jeff Bowman, his story is told in the new film Stronger. He's played by Jake Gyllenhaal. I can't say enough about it. Opens Friday. Jeff, Jake, thanks so much.
Robin, you're the best. So much, Robin.
Some thoughts. Every caregiver in the film is Jeff's real caregiver. His family really does have those great Boston accents. And Roadside Attractions, which produced the film, underwrites this program, which is Here and Now.
It's kind of precious.
1 minute after 5 in the morning.
In only 6 years of war, more than half of Syria's people have fled their homes.
1 minute after noon.
Equifax did not maintain safeguards needed to protect data.
1 minute after 5 in the evening.
Guinea, the embassy says it will stop issuing visas to government officials.
1 minute after 11 at night.
The Rohingya militant group recently announced a ceasefire for humanitarian reasons.
What's happening? What's known? What's next? 1 minute after the hour, every day, from NPR News. 1 minute after 5 in the morning.
Nikki Haley says the Trump administration is not looking for war.
1 minute after noon.
Birth dates and address histories were among the data stolen.
1 minute after 5 in the evening.
The U.S. Embassy in Eritrea says it will no longer issue business and tourism visas.
1 minute after 11 at night.
The poverty rate moved down to 12.7%.
What's happening? What's known? What's next? 1 minute after the hour, every day, from NPR News.
The never-ending cycle of breaking news alerts can make the world appear cluttered and confusing. Premiums and deductibles for lower-income chains fell in the news of the Amazon Whole Foods deal.
Down to the meaning of
In 500 feet, turn right onto Tollgate Road.
NPR is making space for clear, concise journalism and memorable stories.
Turn right
for yourself and stand with the facts. Listen every day.
NPR, always on.
comes from College Vine, where college mentors selected from Harvard, Stanford, Duke, and other schools work with high school students through near-peer mentorship to help students discover their passions, build resumes, and start the college application process. collegevine.com/NPR. And Staples, offering print and marketing solutions for business, including color copies and presentations, booklets, manuals, and signage. Details at Staples stores or staples.com/copy and print. Staples, it's pro time.
This is Here and Now from NPR and WVUR. I'm Jeremy Hobson. The S&P 500 and the
In 600 feet, turn right onto MD 24 South.
Continuing their upward movement ahead of a key meeting tomorrow at the Federal Reserve. Jill Schlesinger is business analyst with CBS News.
Turn right.
Jill on Money. Her podcast is Better Off. Hi, Jill.
Hello.
And what's expected from the Fed?
Not a lot, I have to say. This is going to be one of those snoozer of meetings because really what we know is that the economy is growing, but it's not growing very quickly. We also know that inflation remains tame. And put on top of that these two storms, which definitely will shave some growth, the pace of growth down for the third quarter. And I think that means the central bank's going to sit tight, 1 to 1.25%. That's where short-term interest rates are right now. And I think that for most investors, they believe the Fed
In 1/4 of a mile, bear right onto I-95 South toward Baltimore.
Baltimore. What's driving the market higher is people think the Fed won't be raising interest rates so quickly.
Well, I think that if you look at the combination of low interest rates, and then you see quarterly profits of companies in the S&P 500 really a bit stronger than most had expected, and essentially not a lot happening even on the fiscal side. We're not counting on tax changes right this second, but maybe they'll get something. I think that that's a sign to investors that the status quo is where we are. We do see stock valuations a little bit richer, but I can't say there's a ton of folks who are saying that things are so overblown that a crash is coming. Of course, that's when a crash usually comes.
Exactly. We also may hear from the Fed in the next couple of days about how they're going to unwind their $4.5 trillion portfolio. They bought a lot of bonds.
So you get gas. So you got some gas when I was down there.
That's something that investors are prepared for. Janet Yellen and other Fed officials have been talking about. This is called balance sheet normalization, which just makes me sound so cool at your October parties that are going to be coming up. And what it really means is the Fed bought all these bonds to help boost the economy, as you said, during the financial crisis, during the recession, and during the recovery period. Now all these bonds have to come off. Now, the first thing they're going to do is they say, oh, we're not reinvesting the interest. And then slowly but surely they're going to start pulling those bonds down. It's not going to be something that's crazy and quick. I think the market is sort of saying, look, Janet Yellen is a dove. That means she tends to do things pretty slowly. She doesn't want to upend the status quo. That's probably good for markets. Another reason why people believe that the stock market is the place to be right now.
One of the things that has moved the stock market and has led to a couple of big drops in the Dow over the last few months has been worries about North Korea. Now, President Trump is going to make an address at the UN tomorrow. Is that likely to rattle the markets in any way?
You know, the president always has a shot at rattling everyone, including the markets, and I think that depending on the rhetoric, we're going to see some action. Now, listen, it's really important to remember that when you look at the Federal Reserve's point of view, when you look at the investment point of view, it's through a lens of understanding that not everything said by the president is what is actually going to happen. So the most important thing that I can say is regardless of what occurs in the next few days, whether it's the Fed, the president, or geopolitical tensions in some other area of the world, don't abandon your financial game plan. Stick to it. Don't go crazy here.
Jill Schlesinger, business analyst with CBS News and host of Jill on Money. Thank you.
Take care.
You're listening to Hear It Now.
You know where you were when you heard the news. Who do you turn to now to help you better understand the news? 1A makes space and steps back every day to look beyond the who, what, where, and when and ask why. Speak freely. Join me, Joshua Johnson, for 1A tomorrow from WAMU and NPR. Every weekday morning starting at 9 East, 6 West on NPR Now.
Sharon Brody. Florida
Agriculture Commissioner says the path of Hurricane Irma could not have been more lethal to farmers. He says the scope of damage to the state's fruits and vegetables is unprecedented. He says the citrus crop in southwest Florida is particularly devastated. Attorneys General from 35 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico are urging health insurers to review their policies for pain management treatment to spark a higher use of alternatives to opioid prescriptions. Today, the West Virginia AG announced the bipartisan coalition's efforts. The federal lawsuit filed against Columbus, Ohio, says the city's police continue to use excessive force against residents and, in particular, blacks. The civil rights complaint says the problem persists nearly 20 years after the government sued over similar allegations. You're listening to Here and Now.
San Francisco, it's happening in Chicago, it's happening globally.
I'm Guy Roosevelt. What exactly is happening, and the people who are fighting back against it? We'll tell you next time on Marketplace. Today at 6 p.m. East, 3 West on NPR Now.
Very own radio channel, Metropolitan Output Radio. Dazzling live performances, direct from the stage of an event in New York City several times a week, and gems from the archives. Spanning 9 decades, restored, remastered, sounding more beautiful than ever. An exclusive channel you can't hear anywhere else but Sirius XM, Channel 74, or listen without the call of the Sirius XM app.
Funding for Here and Now comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston, where the program is produced, and your NPR station. Olin College of Engineering, committed to gender balance and preparing young women to explore engineering careers. Information about Olin's open house for women on September 30th is at olin.edu. And ADT Security, helping to protect families and homes for over 140 years. Learn more at ADT.com.
It's Here Now. Hurricane Maria could make landfall later this week on St. Thomas, St. John, St. Martin. Caribbean islands already devastated by Irma. So what happens to tourism? On the U.S. Virgin Islands alone, about half of the 100,000 residents work in tourism. Hugh Riley is Secretary General of the Caribbean Tourism Organization. We last spoke as he arrived on Antigua as part of an emergency response team after Irma. He's back in Barbados. Hugh, on some of the islands, not a building, tree, or road is undamaged. Your sense how this will impact tourism?
Well, it will. Tourism is our livelihood in the Caribbean. Every country that you have just mentioned, every island that you have mentioned, depends upon tourism to a greater or lesser extent, or to a greater extent. And so the rebuilding process will take a while, and until that happens, there is going to be some pain. Most of the Caribbean is untouched by
Prepare to bear ride.
The Caribbean is still going to be affected. Earlier in the year, our forecast was to receive 30 million visitors to the Caribbean this year. Irma has changed that forecast. All things are not equal anymore. We've had a Category 5 hurricane come through that's damaged a number of our islands and has endangered to some extent even those that are unscathed by Irma.
How so?
Well, people don't always have a good, sharp sense of the geography of the Caribbean. I mean, Bahamas is a good example where the islands of the Bahamas...
In a half a mile, bear right and continue following I-95 south toward Baltimore.
With Nassau. But people don't have a good sense of that. So Hurricane Irma, as devastating as it has been,
bear right.
Islands, left many islands untouched because it didn't go anywhere near most of them.
Right, and so you're afraid that people will just in general say, I'm afraid of going to the Caribbean.
That's exactly the problem that we have.
Well, tell us some of the islands that weren't touched.
Barbados, St. Lucia, Grenada, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dominica, Martinique, and Guadeloupe. These are all islands that are very, very popular and very well known. St. Kitts and Nevis. People should really do two things. Look at a map of the Caribbean, or just simply take a look
Watch out, vehicle stopped on shoulder ahead.
You know, what happens to those people when they can't work and maybe it's in St. Bart's, right, you know, next door they can't? I mean, along those lines, maybe people migrating, leaving.
Well, there's always going to be some displacement, and there are ways of handling that. Let's look at what's happened in terms of the islands that are associated with a developed country. So the French government has already stepped up and offered all kinds of assistance, as you might imagine, to rebuild and replace and accommodate the French territories. Similar sentiments have come from the United States government in regard to U.S. territories, particularly the U.S. Virgin Islands, which has taken it on the chin. Same thing with the Dutch government and with the British government. So the question is, where do displaced people go? How do they get accommodated? Where do they find work? That's going to happen via the means that I've just mentioned.
Prepare to bear left.
Within the Caribbean, already you're going to see the movement of skilled labor around the Caribbean because people are able to do that within certain parameters in the region.
But when we spoke to you, as we said a week ago, what islands have you since visited and what did you see?
I went to Anguilla, some went to the British Virgin Islands. So I was able to see firsthand the kinds of issues, some of which are not immediately obvious. So if your electricity supply isn't strong or doesn't exist in some parts of the island.
In a half a mile, bear left and continue following I-95 south toward Baltimore.
People's ability to pay. Most people don't walk around with pockets full of cash. They have credit cards. But if you're trying to do business
bear left
with your credit card, but the banking system isn't running or the connectivity for telecoms isn't there, then you can't get credit card approval. So the obvious answer is, well, why don't you pay cash? Oops, but you can't go to the ATM to get cash. Everything is contingent upon something else being up and running. But similarly, there are a number of businesses in Anguilla, and I'm sure throughout the other affected territories of the Caribbean, where the electrical supply was knocked out, then there's a generator. So big hotels have powerful generators, but those generators need fuel. And the fuel supply, you can expect long lines waiting at petrol stations trying to get fuel. And then somebody said, well, don't worry about it because a tanker is going to arrive tomorrow. Fine. Now, a Category 5 hurricane churns up the waves quite a bit and could disturb those underwater lines from which the fuel would come from the tanker to the storage unit. So those have to be inspected before you can get your new supplies of fuel.
Well, look, we've been reading, comments from some of the country's ministers for tourism. I'm looking at Asap Michael, I think it is, from Antigua. He says a week lost in tourism arrivals in Antigua is worth about $5 million in expenditure in our economy. Is there a push to maybe ask tourists to come, even though the islands aren't ready, maybe create a sort of help us rebuild tourism?
Well, people are actually volunteering to do that. Two things are happening. There is already a groundswell of what people call voluntourism. So there are people saying, I want to come, I want to help in some way, I want to start with the rebuilding process. And then there are others saying, look, I know that the best way of helping is to come there and be a tourist.
Q. Riley, the Secretary General of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, the development agency representing all 28 Caribbean countries. Q, best to you in the coming months.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your concern. Thank you, Robin.
Well, nearly 18 million cruise ship passengers visited
Prepare to bear left.
St. John alone last year, but now ports on the Dutch side of St. Martin, on St. Thomas, and Tortola are closed indefinitely. Three of the busiest cruise ports in the world, Miami, Port Everglades, and Port Canaveral, were also briefly closed. Andrew Coggins is a cruise analyst and management professor at Pace University's Lubin School of Business. Professor, what did Irma do to the industry?
Well, they have to cancel a number of cruises and terminate a number of cruises earlier. So they will end up compensating the guests. So normally they give them a credit towards a future cruise.
In a half a mile, bear left and continue following I-95 south toward Baltimore.
I mean, they're talking about weeks to months to bring this up.
Well, what will happen is the island will let the cruise lines know
they're
able to take cruise ships, and then the cruise
bar and go buy things. And if there's nothing to see, I mean, you know, you're saying it'll bring people into 4 hotels, which will have a hard time
bunch of
coming
shoes
down.
on the side of the road.
Well, people want to go.
Hundreds of them.
Well, the cruise lines will manage it so that there'll be something there for people to see and do when they go in there.
Yeah.
It won't be exactly what it was before.
Well, Norwegian Cruise Line says they're replacing all Eastern Caribbean itineraries, at least through November, a couple months there. What are those stops?
The Eastern Caribbean would be San Juan, St. Thomas, St. Martin, Barbuda, Anguilla, and Antigua. They're reachable on a 1-week cruise from Florida, several ports in 1 week.
We talked about the ships that were offering relief, which is just great. But has anybody come up with the numbers yet, trying to figure out how much of a hit might the industry take?
No, that hasn't been determined yet. Once they have an idea of the full extent of the damage, which is still in the process of being assessed, and what a recovery schedule might look like, then they'll be able to say what the impact on the industry's earnings would be. The industry on a whole is doing quite well. Now, I think this year they're going to carry over 24 million passengers worldwide, and it's growing by leaps and bounds in Asia, especially the Chinese outbound market. However, the Caribbean is the largest area, but all the Caribbean hasn't been affected by the storm.
That's Andrew Coggins, cruise analyst and management professor at Pace University's Lupin School of Business. Professor Andrew, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
And he said all of the Caribbean was not affected by Irma, but we're keeping an eye on Maria as she also bears down on the region. You're listening to Here Now.
1 minute after 5 in the morning.
In only 6 years of war, more than half of Syria's people have fled their homes.
1 minute after noon.
Equifax did not maintain safeguards needed to protect data.
1 minute after 5 in the evening.
Guinea, the embassy says it will stop issuing visas to government officials.
1 minute after 11 at night.
The Rohingya militant group recently announced a ceasefire for humanitarian reasons.
What's happening? What's known? What's next? 1 minute after the hour. Every hour, every day. From NPR News.
On the next Fresh Air, Hillary Clinton. She has a new campaign memoir. We'll talk about candidate and President Trump, chance of lock her up, Russian interference, Comey in the emails. I'll start by sharing with her my takeaway from the part of our previous interview that went viral, the part about how she came to support federal marriage equality. My takeaway is probably not what you think it is. Join us. Today at 4 p.m. East, 1 West on NPR Now.
Funding for Here and Now comes from WBUR Boston and Home Advisor, matching homeowners with background check professionals for a variety of home projects, from minor repairs to major remodels. Homeowners can read reviews, compare prices, and book appointments online at homeadvisor.com. And Geico offering
Prepare to bear ride
for cars, trucks, or SUVs, and providing 24/7 customer service. More information on auto insurance at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO.
This is Here and Now. 4 decades ago, the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins published a book that changed science. In his book, The Selfish Gene, Dawkins argued that genes competing for survival not only drive evolution, but also animal and human behavior. It was an abstract idea at first, but now scientists, including researchers at the Stowers Institute in Kansas City, are figuring out how selfish genes actually do their work. Alex Smith from KCUR reports.
In the cooler section of any Whole Foods.
In a half a mile, bear right and continue following I-95 south.
Over the top marketing.
The mission of Community Vibration Kombucha is to spread love and health responsibility to the world and to better the lives of millions with our products.
That's a video promoting kombucha's peace and love image. But researchers at the Stowers Institute, a biomedical research organization in Kansas City, discovered some downright sinister activity during the mating of the yeast cell that found in kombucha. Stowers investigator Sarah Zanders says she started working with schizosaccharide
Saccharomyces kombucha while working in Seattle, although she's never been a fan of the tea itself.
I'm very thankful for the tea because it's given me a career, but I don't myself drink it.
Normally during mating, whether we're talking about yeast, mice, or humans, there's a kind of showdown between the parties involved to decide which genes get passed along to the next generation. But S. kombucha sometimes contain Smith in Kansas City.
And listeners in Kansas City at KCUR, we're going to be visiting next month. Send us your story ideas on Twitter at Here and Now. Your best production of NPR.
Prepare to turn right.
Association with the BBC World Service. I'm Jeremy Hobson.
I'm Robin Young. This is Here and Now. Funding for Here and Now comes from Landmark College, serving students who learn differently with faculty specializing in LD support, associate and bachelor's degrees, transitional bridge semesters, and summer programs for college and high school students. More at ldbridge.org.
I'm Jeremy Hobson. Under President Obama, the Justice Department sought to hold police accountable for civil rights violations. The new head of the department, Jeff Sessions, has a different focus.
President Trump has issued executive orders to the Department of Justice directing us to support our state.
In 1/4 of a mile, turn right onto West Pratt Street.
Is NPR's source for food stories. Read the salt.
Turn right.
NPR.org.
Support for NPR comes from Optum, committed to tackling the biggest challenges in healthcare with data-driven solutions designed to improve outcomes and make the system better for everyone. Learn more at Optum.com. Optum, how well gets done. You will reach your destination in 1/4 of a mile.
From our bureaus in Virginia Beach.
Your destination is on the left.
NPR is always on.
From WHYY in Philadelphia, I'm Terry Gross with Fresh Air. Today, Hillary Clinton. She has a new campaign memoir called What Happened. We'll talk about many things, including something that stunned me, what Donald Trump said at a rally a couple of days after the third debate. He was talking about how Clinton showed up at the podium slightly late after a commercial break.
I'm watching the debate, and she disappeared. Where did she go? Where did she go? I know where she went. It's disgusting. I don't want to talk about it. No, it's too disgusting.
We'll hear what Clinton has to say about that, and I'll share with her my takeaway from the part of our previous interview that went viral, the part about how she came to support federal marriage equality. It's probably not the takeaway you expect. Hillary Clinton coming up on Fresh Air. First News.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. President Trump is making his debut at the United Nations this week. He addresses the General Assembly for the first time tomorrow. Now, on the eve of his highly anticipated speech, NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports one of Trump's first messages to the international body is streamlined. Trump once dismissed the UN as a club where leaders get together and talk, but today he praised the UN Secretary General for leading what Trump calls the bold reform agenda.
We seek a United Nations that regains
that was it. It was on the right.
around the world. In order to achieve this, the United Nations must hold every level of management accountable, protect whistleblowers, and focus on results rather
You have reached your destination.
It's a Marriott Inner Harbor.
UN ambassador and the Secretary General spoke. Ambassador Nikki Haley says the 128 countries that took part signed a pledge of support for the UN reform agenda, and she's hoping the rest will join too. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the United Nations.
World leaders are expected to tackle a slew of security issues, especially an intensifying nuclear threat from North Korea. Iran is another major concern for the administration. When asked today if he plans to pull the U.S. out of the Obama-era pact with Iran that eased sanctions in exchange for Tehran's commitment to halt its nuclear work, Trump responded, "You'll see very soon." Defense Secretary
In 200 feet, turn left, then turn left again.
To Afghanistan, he says most are either on their way or have been notified of their
Turn left.
deployment. A week after Hurricane Irma struck, people are beginning to return to their homes in portions of the Florida Keys. More than 19,000 people in Monroe County reportedly have registered for disaster assistance. Governor Rick Scott went to Marathon, where he says the Keys may be ready for tourists in a couple of weeks.
My goal is by the 1st of October that we're ready, we're open for business. But there's a lot of work to be done in the meantime. We got to make sure people have their car back. We got to make sure our water system's working. We got to make sure our sewer system's working. We got to continue to clean up the debris.
And it's back to school for students in Miami-Dade County. NPR's Ned Ulaby spoke with a parent relieved to be moving on since Hurricane Irma shut everything down.
Turn left onto West Lombard Street.
Since the storm, volunteer, cleaning up a local historic landmark. She is delighted to have her daughter back in school.
I feel great that she's back, to normal life. She's not as happy as I am.
Not everything's back to normal at Miami Arts Charter. Some of the staff have yet to return.
Not all the teachers are back now. She's at Miami Arts Charter, and some teachers they had to evacuate because they are not from here.
Some of Miami-Dade schools are still having problems with power. Air conditioning is an ongoing issue. Still, the superintendent of the nation's 4th largest school district says classrooms are the safest, most secure places for children right now. Nada Ulaby, NPR News, Miami.
And now Hurricane Maria. Portions of the Eastern Caribbean could arrive Puerto Rico by Wednesday. This is NPR. Rolling Stone founder Jan Wenner and his son Gus are selling the magazine. NPR's David Folkenflik reports the move caps years of critical headlines.
Jan Wenner rolled out his first issue of Rolling Stone 50 years ago to capture and capitalize on the counterculture. It evolved into a tastemaker in popular culture. More recently, the magazine called Goldman Sachs a great vampire squid. Another story cost General Stanley McChrystal his job. In recent years, however, Wenner struggled to keep the magazine relevant. A story focusing on an alleged rape at the University of Virginia collapsed.
Try not to hit me, you shits.
In a lawsuit against the publication.
Jesus Christ.
Wenner brought in his son Dustin.
Learn how to take a left.
They sold out sister publications Us Weekly and Men's Journal, as well as a nearly half stake in Rolling Stone. And then they claimed they were all set.
I'm not happy on here either.
Now, the Wenners are courting buyers. David Folkenflik, NPR News, New York.
The Secretary of the Interior reportedly is recommending cutbacks or changes at 10 national monuments. Multiple news outlets have been reporting a leaked memo from Ryan Zinke lists 2 Utah monuments among those targeted, Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante. Together, they account for more than 3 million acres. The memo also reportedly marks 2 marine monuments in the Pacific Ocean for reduction. President Trump ordered a review of 27 national monuments after accusing previous presidents, including Barack Obama, of approving improper
green light and I'll go.
Before the close, the Dow was up 63 at 22,331. This is NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from TIAA. Whether it's investing, advice, banking, or retirement, TIAA believes...
In 1/4 of a mile, turn left, then turn left again.
TIAA calls this the new success story. Learn more at TIAA.org.
I'm not happy.
1 minute after 5 in the morning.
Nikki Haley says the Trump administration is not looking for war.
1 minute after noon.
Birth dates and address histories were among the data stolen by hackers.
1 minute after 5 in the evening.
The U.S. Embassy in Eritrea says it will no longer issue business and tourism visas.
1 minute after 11 at night.
The poverty rate moved down to 12.7%.
What's happening? What's known? What's next? 1 minute after the hour. Every hour, every day. From NPR News.
This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross. Today we have the new interview I recorded Thursday with Hillary Clinton, who's just published her memoir about the campaign and losing the election. It's called What Happened. She writes that she couldn't bear letting down the millions of people who voted for her, but she says, I couldn't get the job done, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. The last time I spoke with her was in June 2014, before she announced her candidacy. An excerpt of that interview, the excerpt about her position on marriage equality, was picked up by many news outlets. Many commentators thought that she was evasive in answering my questions about how she came to support federal marriage equality. How that excerpt went viral is something I'm going to briefly revisit with her. Anyway, a lot has happened in Hillary Clinton's life and in the life of our country since the last time we spoke. So let's get to it. Hillary Clinton, welcome to Fresh Air, and thank you for being here in our studio. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much, Terry. I'm delighted to be here.
So I want to pick up where we left off, and this isn't going to go in the direction you think it is, so bear with me. The last time we talked, an excerpt of our interview went viral. And we'd spent a few minutes earlier on the air talking about how as Secretary of State, you are a strong LGBTQ rights advocate, saying gay rights are human rights are gay rights. Then after that, I asked you about whether there were gay-related positions, LGBTQ-related positions, such as marriage equality, that were more difficult to support when you were a senator because you thought the public, the voters, weren't ready yet. So this went viral, and the takeaways in the press seemed to be that you were evasive. Turn left. Some parts of the press that you weren't quick enough to endorse marriage equality. I wanted to tell you my takeaway. My questions were a little unclear and unfocused. I think you were a little evasive, but here's my real takeaway. Although a lot of people, including myself, might have assumed that this went viral because of gay rights activists pushing it out, it was the opposite. It actually went viral because of a right-wing website called America Rising. They had it up before we even had it up on our website. Turn left onto West Pratt Street. Quotes from the mainstream press and use them against you. So the excerpt of our interview was taken out of context. It no longer had the context of you being a forceful LGBTQ advocate or Secretary of State. And really, you will reach your destination in 700 feet. Anyone America Rising would likely support the president. So here was the right trying to turn their base against you, the right attacking you from the left. So my question to you is,
okay, it's on the right.
America Rising was behind pushing it out and helping it go viral.
I didn't know specifically who it was, Terry, but I've had now so much experience in both watching and being the object of a lot of right-wing attacks. And they've gotten increasingly sophisticated. So many times you don't know where they're coming from. And as I write in my book, they are now aided and abetted by Russia and by other groups that are part of this right-wing ecosystem and echo chamber. So I would not be surprised to hear that about anything that I've said, because in the campaign we've just finished, the amount of right-wing attacks of foreign interference and influence has just exploded. So what used to be kind of a cottage industry by the right is now much more sophisticated, pervasive, and in alliance with one of our foreign adversaries. Let's get to the president. Losing is always hard. The person you lost to, who is now our president, is somebody you've described as a con man with no experience to be president and not the right temperament to be president. It did make it a lot more painful. I had said, look, if I lost to another Republican, I would be disappointed. I would not agree with a lot of their approach toward economics and other important issues. But I wouldn't fear for my country. I believe that Donald Trump poses a clear and present danger to our democracy, to our institutions, to the rule of law, to the civil rights and human rights of so many Americans, to the economic distribution of wealth, which is already skewed out of proportion to where it should be. I tried to say that during the campaign, and I tried to warn people because I actually believed him. I believed that
GoPro stop.
There were lots who said, oh, he's never realized that he's not going to do all those things he said, and the wall and immigrants and the like. And I thought